Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Доброе время суток to everyone who may be watching this. This is, a marathon, not a Ukrainian TV marathon, but our own marathon. My name is Yuri Rashkin, and with me, of course, as every week, is Jonathan Fink. Jonathan, hello.
Hello there. It's not a marathon as in a chocolate bar, because before we had Snickers, it was called marathon in the UK. That really does age me, but it's a different
Wow.
kind of
Yes.
marathon.
Write in comments what associations do you have with word marathon. But I think for me, this is an exercise that I feel like we can manage. If this
Yes.
was like a running marathon, I would be like, we're in deep trouble. If this was a chocolate bar, it'd probably be okay. But I think for our goals here of being on the so-called air streaming for up to and including 4 hours, I think it's a nice little marathon. Perhaps it's a half a marathon. We'll see how things go.
A
But
half marathon. Yes. I'm not even sure how much a half a marathon, but there we go.
So how is life? How is we can start going over news. We can talk about what's going on in Ukraine. We can talk about some of the things that we're raising money for. Maybe we can start with that.
Yeah, we'll kick those off. So I can't add the comments, but at this point, maybe if you can add the comments there. We've got Calf Ukraine and we've got Kupiansk Vampires under Jigger's Paw. Those are the two campaigns that we're currently running on Silicon Curtain. Now, of course, some people might have preferences, and I think this is an interesting talking point. We could put this to some of our guests later. Calf Ukraine is, I would say, ostensibly non-combat. Now, obviously, those vehicles are going to be used on the front. They're going to be used to help people get closer to their positions, although you can't drive these vehicles, that close to the front anymore. And they're going to be used for evacuating people and just transporting people around. So, yes, they are adjacent to and they are assisting and enabling, let's say, military and kinetic operations, but they're for vehicles that in themselves, they are not going to be directly killing anybody. So, of course, a lot of people feel more comfortable donating to that. Whereas vampire drones, bomber drones, that's a little more explicit. But actually, not a little more. That is totally explicit what you're signing up for. And, of course, we've got these two choices, which I think is important because some people, even now, are going to be thinking, I don't want to contribute directly to something that sort of is so overtly military. And others are completely up for it. Others really, recognize that the only way to end this and save more lives in the long term is Ukrainian victory and the expulsion of the invader. So that's a nice little bit of background there, I think, about these two campaigns. You're muted.
Yes, and we have the description of these in the description to the video. Links to these in the description to the video. And I will also mention that I have a couple of, let's see. This is the fundraiser. His QR codes are an amazing thing. This is the one that I've been raising money for with Roman Cymbaluk during our last stream. So if our audience would like to partake in that one, that is awesome. Then you'll be supporting projects that Roman Cymbaluk is supporting, and then and those are definitely military related and centered. And I welcome I love when people go to those and then they write in comments like whatever they want because did the QR code work? And then another one is there's a couple of groups that I was in Germany, like when Jonathan and I connected, and met with a couple of people involved with groups that are raising money for power generators in Ukraine. And that is a really big thing as well. So there's two groups that I've connected with, and they're doing the exact same thing because basically they're raising money, but they have connections in Ukraine. They want to make sure that things go well. So they have, so each of them has their own connections in a big country. And so there's one group with blue QR code, and there's one with black, and they're both in Dusseldorf area. And I think they're, it's important. There's a really cool story there, I guess, but it's just as an immigrant, I understand that when people leave a country, they want to become usually part of the new culture. They want to build a new life. They want to have not necessarily part of new culture, but they want to build a new life where they're concerned about things that are surrounding them, and things that are happening back home start to fade away over time. And I think it's just really important that there are people that Ukrainian diaspora is doing such a good job, I would say, overall, in helping Ukraine. And I think that's really an important part of diaspora, is to help whatever may be your native land, is to get better and help it and support it. And in this instance, you have people who are raising money for power generators, even though they live in Germany for years, some of them for many years. So I think that's really awesome and admirable. And I invite everyone to support and always to comment.
Absolutely. And it's never been more important. Now, where we are at, I guess what could be described as a bit of an inflection point. And I don't know what what you've called this episode, but I think I very consciously what I've got here. I've got a dancing ballerina. And the title is Let the Swans Dance. Now, some people are going to get the reference. Put in the comments what you think that reference is to. I think most people who've been following the channel, or what's going on, or taking interest in Russian history, will understand that reference. But let's have a bit of a comment thing sort of going before I sort of explain my interpretation of that. But Let the Swans Dance, I think, also for me is the sign that we are at an inflection point where Ukraine, despite suffering terrible losses, both civilian and military, and enduring extraordinary hardship, seems to be on the ascendancy, militarily, technically, in terms of the sort of ratio of damage it's inflicting on Russia. And the fact that month on month, the last 4 months, more Russians have been attrited, let's say, use that euphemism there, than their nominal recruitment rate. And that attrition rate is increasing. So this is creating huge problems and will create huge problems. The other significant figure is the net gain of land has flipped, really, for the first time last month. It was edging up. But in March, Ukraine gained more territory than Russia did overall when you calculate all the wins and losses. So take those two figures in together, the attrition rate and the fact that Russia's recruitment numbers have gone down, and the fact they're losing land. Well, this points to me that it's going in one direction. Combine that with the, I say, ascendancy or improvement in Ukrainian tech, volumes of drones becoming available. This is an inflection point. It really is.
I agree with you so much, Jonathan, that I am about to will record a video, but in Russian, most likely referencing this inflection point, referencing Winston Churchill and his speech delivered on November 10th, 1942, marked a pivotal shift in World War II following the Allied victory at the Second Battle of Alamein. What did he say? This is the end of the beginning. And I think that this may be the inflection point, the name, like possible name for this inflection point, the end of the beginning. Because I agree with you, even though the situation seems on some level as brutal as ever in Ukraine, because you have attacks by drones just the other night, and I may, that are brutal, that are deadly, that are barbaric, that are really more effective than we wish they were, by far, obviously, whatever. So, but at the same time, it feels like Ukraine is able to actually manage the threat of the Russian army invading and taking over, because the statistic that I saw is that 96 or 94% of all Russian casualties are caused by Ukrainian drones, which tells me that this is just an incredible level of control over the battlefield.
70% sometime last year. It started to edge up to 80% reportedly, earlier in the year. We're now up to 90, 95%. I mean, these are all estimates, of course, but it's it is gathered from battlefield data. There's no single
that really
reliable figure,
matters.
but yeah.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I just thought, it's a really important number because it tells me that a lot of questions that people have had about what's going on in Ukrainian army. How's morale? How's this? How's that? Well, I mean, it would be nice now that Hungary had elections and Ukraine can perhaps get that money that it's been probably counting on, I'm sure. It's going to help a lot of things. But when we're looking at this mechanization, robotization of the battlefield, then it seems like the focus needs to shift to protecting population centers. It really is in just kind of battling Russian menace in stages.
Yeah, and you're well, we're going to talk as well, I think, about this, because this is some interesting stuff has happened. We had this no, it wasn't Peter, but it was the Moscow Economic Forum, not the one sort of managed by the state. This has always been one that is, yes, it has a lot of state aligned or even state employed expert economists, but it's the one which wasn't sort of structured to be propagandistic. It was the one that was tolerated, I think, because you had some actual criticism, not of the regime necessarily, because that's not allowed, but critique of its policies. And it needed that kind of, I think, mechanism by which it could get information and analysis that is a little more reliable and not just sort of, snort its own propaganda. This one that's just happened a few weeks ago is extraordinary in its character, in that it has been a whole litany of voices, not just saying, okay, we got this problem, that problem, but screaming out loud that unless the course radically changes, and the implication is the war is wound down, that the entire economy is not just going to hit the buffers, it is hitting the buffers. And certain speakers, again, we've got to remember, these are not dissidents, these are regime-aligned people in the most part, most of whom would be, I'm sure, delighted if Ukraine was conquered and erased. They are saying essentially that the economic problem is here, it's happening now, and that the government is falsifying figures and quite possibly believing its own falsified figures, that the actual rate of economic collapse is far worse even than the most pessimistic forecast the government's letting out, and it's sounding the alarm. We can go into some of the details of what those figures are, but this is unique, I think, in terms of Putin's tenure, in terms of what is being said vis-a-vis, critique of the government's policies. And there's the underlying hint here that Putin has to go, that he is now an impediment to any change.
Well, perhaps those Russians need to pray harder, because whatever they're doing isn't helping, and they're not willing or able or courageous. They're not or desperate enough to do anything to change the situation. We have certain people who will speak up here and there, and to me that looks like screws breaking, but to what extent does this mean that the machine is about to explode if some of the weaker screws have not managed to hang on?
Yes. Well, I mean, last time we spoke, I think a few weeks ago on this topic, we were saying this is the sound of a machine being put under extreme duress. This is the sound of it's the screech of the metal being pushed, but not necessarily beyond endurance, just being pushed outside of the shape that it's supposed to be, that sort of squeal of metal. However, now I think we are getting noises that the machine is structurally breaking. This is what the tone and implication has been of it.
And, well, I know that there's popular people that talk about Russian economics and Russian economy, and again, there's periodic I don't know what the term is, what is the correct verb to describe the screams and yells, protestations about policies, God forbid Putin, but then it goes on. So yes, I mean, okay, there's a lot of unemployment that's expected in the summer. Okay, Russian people, they're not hunters, they're more gatherers. they're more a society that's built on, if you look at Russian cuisine, they cook out of things they found in the forest, berries, mushrooms. They'll just run away. They're not going to be like attempting to change anything. So then the question is, will they be willing to go to war and get fed to the god of Putin, because they'll be destroyed, because that's how things are. It's automated practically now. They can just like step in onto this escalator of death, and it's a few steps and bump. And I still have no faith in people in Russia to have whatever it is I described, and whatever you think it is in comments, balls to go up against Putin. I'm not sure I would be if I was in their position. In fact, my position has always been, I agree with my parents, the only thing you can do in Russia is leave. But if they're staying there, then I guess they must like it. So that's one way to look at it. And if they're just saying that the country's moving in the wrong direction, well, again, country cannot be changed unless Putin is changed. And if they're not willing to change Putin, then they can either leave or shut up. Sit down and be quiet. Go and just dribble. It's like J.D. Vance told Pope, stay in your lane. So it's
apparently that lane doesn't even include theology. I don't know what lane they envisage for the Pope there. I think waving and smiling, limit it to that.
Yeah, it must be. And I think there's a big conversation there, because this is an American Pope. And this is somebody who represents really the opposing view, opposite view on Christianity, because Trump is a much more, vengeful God. And perhaps it's Old Testament, perhaps it's Russian Orthodox. I don't even know. I hope no God was this crazy. But I think that Pope is representing the different Jesus, different view on religion, different view for purpose of religion and goal of religion. And apparently it does not, agree. It doesn't match with worshiping Trump. I have found a really interesting that it is the religious fanatics, religious fanatics, such as Pope, or Iran Ayatollahs, that are not bending to Trump's will. Everybody else finds it, like in the world of real politics, thinks it's better to just be like, okay, Trump, sure, you're the greatest. Thanks for leaving. Thanks, just never come back if you can. Come back when you have a different president. But these, it's like they have a different level of, management system is different. And of course, Stalin has been known for having said that, what about Vatican? Do they have, how many divisions do they have? And Vatican is not very strong in terms of divisions, army, military. Their guards, I think their helmets are printed on laser printer. But what do you do? It's a very important, especially in light of the fact that news has just come out that in America, in the United States, youth have become much more religious over last few years. And not just youth, but young males. Young females have stayed at about 30%. But
is
young
this
males,
true? I heard this was fairly, let's say, self-reinforcing research done on very flimsy criteria. Yes. I've heard that there was it's like the old research that's done into cigarettes can't hurt you, that kind of quality stuff, or stuff that's really basically commissioned by the
was this research
industry.
Commissioned by Catholic Church?
I'm thinking that the dice were very much stacked towards the result or the outcome they wanted to hear, and in reality, there's no major religious shift. There's no huge deepening of fundamentalism or even religion light, as it were. So I suspect that this is a little bit self-serving here. But what,
I will say, Jonathan, I am if you can finish your thought, and I will quietly sit. But I would like to say a couple of words about that before we move on to the next topic.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a couple of things there as well, because I think, what the Pope has come back and said, and today he's come back and punched very hard, and he's basically said that do not drag faith and religion, which is sacred and sacrosanct. Do not drag it and tarnish it with the filth of politics. Do not manipulate it and use it for personal political ends. He's come back and punched very, very hard. On the Trumpian side, I heard a rumor that actually one of the stories going around is that, well, of course, this Pope is a communist because, well, he comes from Chicago and he's secretly being controlled by Barack Obama and the deep state. Well, no great surprise they might reach for that, but that's the kind of world of crazy we're living in.
Whenever they say, and Trump says Barack Obama, they always like to say Hussein, because that's the punchline. Let's not miss the punchline there.
Yes, America's first Muslim president, as we know, is ludicrous.
Anyway, I wanted to go back to the youth in religious because I teach at university, so I see young people in mass for years. And I wouldn't necessarily object to such a result because we're talking really about an uptick. We're going from like 28% to 42%. So it says more about the increase and versus for males versus for females staying at about the same. And I would say that sounds pretty reasonable to me as findings. Preliminary, of course, more research is needed. But what I see is situation in the United States where life has become much less certain, especially for young males. Young females have made a bet, women, I feel, have made a bet on higher education, on improving their lot through education. And it really consistently seems to work out pretty well for them. I mean, I have, and it works out on all levels, all sciences. This is not like men do this. No, I mean, I have a student who is a math major, and he was going to a math conference with the team. He's the only man, male on the team, so he got his own hotel room. He was excited. So these kinds of dynamics make sense because young males are not sure what's going to be happening. And in the United States, in general, as a society, we lack really deep roots. We are just maybe a few generations here and there, and that's part of the reason we don't have we're very optimistic about the future because we just kind of keep shifting forward. But sometimes this keep shifting forward seems like maybe we're going to some place that's really not really promising. And part of it is AI revolution, because young people are starting to see that they have to compete against the technology that's really does a lot of what they're going to be expected to do in their first jobs. And so they're really, everybody's nervous, but young people and young men in particular. Now we have uptick in world uncertainty as far as war possibility. And this means in the United States, if young people start asking and their parents, is there going to be draft? And so those kinds of questions. But I think it's just a bigger outlook of what am I going to do with my life that slightly more males have now than before. That seems to reasonable to me. Now, the other part here is the religion. That doesn't necessarily mean that having decided that they need to have faith in something around them and having decided to place it in a religion or in God or a higher being, that doesn't necessarily automatically makes them conservative, which is important to understand. And that's where Pope is so important, because if he provides that alternative vision for what a religious person may be, right now with young people being, becoming potentially more religious, it's never been more important. Well, I'm sure, okay, fine, there's been lots of times where it's been more important, but this is really an important time to have a pope that can project positive values. Not to mention for Catholic Church, there's jokes in the United States that both Trump and Catholic Church share problems of, history with children. So, I mean, there's, if you want to go that direction, it works in all directions. There's been a lot of popes, there's been a lot of priests. But right now, Catholic Church is getting to be more popular in the United States and becoming more popular, not just because of Latin Americans, but also because of this Pope and the last Pope that have really had a strong appeal to people in the United States.
This is it. And the challenge, of course, that I see here is distinguishing between genuine and heartfelt faith and those who are, let's say, either misunderstanding it or using it for their own ends. And I think there's two interesting kind of stories that emerge from that. One is Hegseth and his, you've seen this one, quoting fire and brimstone.
Tarantino, man.
But yeah, it's come from Pulp Fiction. So this is.
It's kind of almost hard to dislike. It's hard to dislike Pete Hegseth after that. At least he likes Pulp Fiction.
But it suggests he lives in a world of Pulp Fiction, and that is the level of reality in which everything is interpreted. Slightly scary. And actually, the Iran policy, it's no good relating it to a sort of New York Times level of rationalization. It seems that we have to relate foreign policy back to a sort of Tarantino level of, that sort of absolute, you punch me, I'll punch back, or whatever, or get the first punch in kind of thing. And of course, the other story is J.D. Vance, who is compelled to defend Trump's war against God, war against the Pope. I think he's onto a loser there. And I think after Hungary, which has diminished him significantly, he is now further diminished by having to repeat and defend Trump's nonsense. He's degrading what little credibility he might have had with genuine believers. You can see he's trying to build a persona because he's got a book coming out about his faith, his conversion, his journey. He's trying to establish himself as a credible and authentic candidate in this conservative religious space, but unfortunately totally undermined by design, as it were. And we've just at that moment been joined by Mr. Philip Ittner. What a delight.
Well, it's funny you should be talking about J.D. Vance, because one of the major criticisms about him, and it's going to be inescapable in any political future of his, is the man is far too mercurial to get any traction, aside from his lack of natural charisma. But I mean, he's changed his name 3 times. His whole basis of his mystique is that he comes from a part of the country that he doesn't come from. He does the hillbilly elegy from a place where he went to in the summer off years when he wasn't at school at a very, well, I won't say very, but at least a well-to-do Ohio suburban high school. And he bases his entire book on degrading them, and so he changes his personality and to suit his audience. This is how he comes to the attention of Peter Thiel and Silicon Valley and all of that. So, everything that he touches seems to rot. So I'm politically not terribly concerned about J.D. Vance.
Which is a relief. I mean, he seems to have burnt his bridges. That little performance he gave recently in a sort of, I think it was somewhere in the Deep South University, that was a whole that was empty. I mean, he performed to a
Yes.
basically.
Yes. Well, and you're both not American, so I'll clue you into another thing that was disastrous.
Yuri, I think, you
Yuri, do you have American? By the way, hello, Yuri. You and I haven't interacted as much as I would hope we would have in the past. Our paths,
Philip, it's very nice to meet you.
Our ways have kind of circled around one another, but I haven't actually had a chance to introduce myself to you. I'm a big fan, and I appreciate the information that you bring to this arena. But one of the things that I was going to say is, okay, perhaps a natural-born American is the incident at the donut shop. Do you guys remember that at all?
With Clinton or which way?
No, with Vance.
Oh, but he was asking for whatever you have, right?
Yeah, whatever you have, and how long have you worked here? And it's a donut shop, man. I mean, like, it's not. He was so socially, awkward that to an American.
Well, I mean, there might be a reason why he's, if he's friends with Peter Thiel, and Thiel, who also looks very, antisocial. So maybe this is like on that they connect. But JD Vance, I think, is a really an amazing turnoff. I feel like backstabbing is his like unifying feature. In his book, he backstabbed all the people that he grew up with. In his career, now he's a brand new Catholic because he's a Catholic since 2019. He's already backstabbing
with a Presbyterian church on the cover of his book.
So who is he backstabbing at what point is the only question. But I guess the different question that I'm now trying to figure out, maybe gentlemen can help me. Do you think that Trump is trying to screw JD Vance because he doesn't like him anymore? And so he's setting him up to like lose the Catholic base, show himself as a failure in negotiations, a failure on the world stage, anything just like, or is Trump just, he's got a problem. So he goes, who's going to go? Who's willing to go? JD Vance, you go, or maybe Iran said that they wanted JD Vance because he's anti-war.
This was the Scaramucci's theory, I think, actually, on that one. Yeah.
Well, he doesn't seem to have done it to Rubio, which I think is worth noting, because some of the things that he threw proverbially under the bus for JD Vance could have easily been done by the Secretary of State, and really in many ways should have been done by the Secretary of State. A political protocol would actually indicate that it should be the Secretary of State that starts these kind of things, and then you bring in the executive, whether it's the vice president or the president himself. But the State Department should actually be the one that initiates so much of this. Actually, even before that, we go down to the ambassadorial level, and this is political and diplomatic protocol, and they have gone from 0 to 100 by throwing in the second most powerful man in the executive branch of the United States. So it does make me wonder whether or not this is purposeful, and that Trump, for whatever reason, has decided that he wants to scuttle his vice president, because he doesn't. He should have been doing it to his Secretary of State, So why go straight to VP? So it makes me question.
That same theory would then apply to Rubio as well. I mean, it maybe talks to something, again, I'm borrowing from Scaramucci here, saying that Trump is not someone who envisages a world which he's absent from, is not someone who thinks about a future which he cannot dominate and fill, obviously, with his, egotistical, narcissistic nonsense. Therefore, he's not going to try to bring that world about. And actually, his narcissism may make him resent the thought that anyone might outlive him, and therefore, consciously or unconsciously, he's looking to destroy his would-be successors. Now, of course, there's a similarity here. Mr. Vladimir Putin is somebody else.
I was just going to say.
Cannot tolerate succession or the idea of succession.
I mean, it's apples and oranges in some ways, because Vova can't allow anybody to rise to a position of national power, because that threatens him. In the White House, you can play a game of courtship. You can get one organ of the executive branch against the legislative and the judicial, and there's a lot more politicking that can be done, I think, in America. So he can pit Rubio against Vance, or he can screw with things like he did with Tulsi Gabbard, or with why am I gapping on her name? The woman who shot her dog, Kristi Noem, and kind of throw her into an environment in which she's not necessary. And I'm not saying that there are equivalencies within the court of Tsar Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. He plays some of those same games as well, but ultimately, while there are these similarities, I think that Putin being the center of gravity and being the star, the sun around all of which else circles, is not really kind of how it's done in the United States. I may be splitting hairs, but nevertheless,
I think there's really, you're onto something, because the way I've been looking to simplify, because I get asked on news to give like news commentary in Ukraine, mostly, although a little bit in Poland, sometimes in Israel, every day, many times, 10 to 15 times a week. And it feels like, there's a lot of stuff happening, and I have to like come up with a perspective on everything. It's a little exhausting. So to simplify for myself, I thought a simple rule is, well, if Trump is going to do something or not going to do something, is, will Putin like it? If Putin will like it, there's a good likelihood that they'll find a national security reason why that would work. And if Putin doesn't like it, then, or wouldn't like it, like what would Putin do? Like a bracelet, simple bracelet to wear. If Putin doesn't like it, Trump will find multitude of reasons that all make sense on paper why that's not something that we want to do. And for one, a simple example is for me, Tulsi Gabbard, because people who view Trump's politics go, okay, we know who is going to be next. There's the next one should be Tulsi Gabbard because she's a woman. Because Trump is firing Pam Bondi, Kristi Noem. There's a pattern emerging. Tulsi Gabbard should be next. But I think that Tulsi Gabbard, like Putin likes her, or she's a good friend of Kremlin. She's been promoting Putin's talking points for well over a decade. So, and she's a director of national intelligence. Wow. I mean, you don't like give that up. So I think that she actually has a pretty good chance of sticking around, no matter how inept she might seem or how unhappy Trump may be with her. So those kinds of patterns in small and big decisions, there's sometimes little gaps that I go, well, I'm not quite sure, but it's probably because I haven't done enough research. Like, for instance, exactly why we're removing the waivers from the sanctions, and now the shadow fleet is once again sanctioned, where we had those temporary waivers for 30 days, but Besant came out and we canceled them. I mean, Putin wouldn't like that, but I think there must be just other bigger fish to fry that they're dealing with, and strategically it all works out for them. But I wonder what you think.
Well, I think certainly with Tulsi Gabbard, you might be right in the sense that she is the Kremlin's person in the White House. I mean, she has openly admitted that her primary source of news at one point was RT, which is just mainlining Kremlin propaganda, and this woman is national security. So that should be sending red alarm fires, all throughout the government. But she's not the only one, and that's what bothers me, is that there are others within the administration. I mean, even J.D. Vance has, repeated stuff. We've had people in both branches of the Senate, in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, of guys openly repeating, I mean, almost word for word, Peskov or Lavrov or whomever else. I remember one of the things that was so shocking to me was something at some congressional hearing back when Matt Gaetz was still in the House of Representatives, that he made a repeated point to, I forget who it was exactly, but somebody who was administrating, the idea of sending more aid to Ukraine. And he kept beating on this idea of, are any of these funds or weapons going to the Azov Brigade? And I just sat there and I went, I wonder if Matt Gaetz even knows who the Azov Brigade is. I mean, and of course, this was earlier in the year, earlier in the war, when, the kind of Russian mythology of Azov had far more traction in the West, and certainly even in the United States. Not that it's gone away, but the fact that he was so determined and adamant and kept pounding at this idea of, is any of this aid going to the Azov? And, with the presumption, of course, that the Azov was, Nazi and neo-Nazi or whatever demonology he wanted to accept from the Kremlin. But it was shocking to me that a member of the House of Representatives would be taking as a given the narrative fed to him by the Kremlin. And I've seen this over decades sneaking in, but it has gotten so much worse under the Trump administration, where the worldview and the perspective of the Kremlin is taken as de facto truth. There's no investigation or conversation about, well, what does that mean that weapons would go to Azov, for example, or that there are bio labs in Georgia, or that, take your pick of all the stuff that comes out of the Kremlin would be accepted as a given in our body politic in the United States. But it has happened, and it's the political scene, it's industry, it's culture. The information war in the United States has been extremely effective, and it plays into conspiracy theories. It plays into America as kind of a terror state, a power broker, all the things that Putin sees about how the world operates is regurgitated by a certain sector in the United States as gospel. And I've seen that transition happen in my home country, and it's been extremely disturbing. And now they're in the White House.
I mean, it reminds me a little bit. There's a nice comment in the chat here about surely this idea of a sort of right-wing conservative militia in Ukraine, surely that should be incredibly attractive to MAGA Republicans. But there's a kind of irony in there. But of course, it's back to the sketch, the Nazi turning the other one and saying, "Are we the bad guys? Were we really the bad guys?
Are we the baddies now?" Right.
Yeah. But if we look for consistency in this, I think we're on to a loser.
To me, this is just this is like a marker when person says those kinds of things or starts reciting Fox News propaganda or whatever. And I go, "Oh, I see where you eat. I see where you drink. Okay, good to know."
Yeah.
You can hear it in the subtext of it, and you know where it comes from. But unfortunately, it's been again so insipid that it's not even a point of debate. It is just accepted that the
In
world
that
should
silo.
be divided.
Right.
Yeah, that the world needs to be divided by power centers, and we, by by helping Ukraine, are going against the natural system of how things should work, and that is that there should be these major, sectors of power. And oh, by the way, America and the West have been doing all these terrible things in the former Soviet Union and provoking Russia and all of this. It's all the West's fault. And of course, Ukraine has no agency, but if it did, it would be filled with Nazis. And all of this narrative being just kind of absorbed and not questioned is something that has deeply disturbed me in America.
What's interesting is that that narrative is being challenged here because people that are carrying this narrative are also talking about they are the ones that are being blamed for the price crisis, let's put it this way, in the United States. And so we have an interesting, like the whole idea with Trump being Jesus and then offending everybody all of a sudden. I think it's because his base is losing money. And now that they're losing money, they're like, and what did he say about Jesus? Wow. Now, I think if he was making them money, then I think they if they were feeling like there was more jobs, they were getting paid better, life was better, they'd be like, crazy old man, he's just having his fun, whatever. But life isn't good. And I think that failure, and maybe the same we saw in Hungary, where it's the economic collapse that is more important than anything else, than support of, I guess in that case, support of Ukraine did matter. But the United States, it was mostly about, we just wanted the eggs to be cheaper. And when the people that said that didn't work out, whatever else they were selling, we don't want any of it because we wanted the eggs to be cheaper. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. Again, we can maybe relate this back to what's happening in Russia, and we're having all this disquiet amongst apparently the Z blogger community. They're starting to speak out. Well, the trigger, of course, was the repression of the internet, repression of Telegram, and of course, they will frame it as a kind of as a inverted kind of freedom issue. No, it's attacking their revenue. It's attacking the platforms through which they make money. It's denying them the ability to make money. These are squeals of pain that are hitting their revenue. And I think the interpretation around Tucker Carlson, who flipped very early, Candace Owens, Alex Jones, all the others, is that Trump's no longer making them wads of cash. They have to find another narrative that resonates, that's going to keep that sort of gravy train going. So there's a direct relation to how the Z propaganda milieu works. And I think, what's happening here, there are, of course, slightly different dynamics in that in the Z Patriot community, people will be sort of given an editorial script, right? You have to talk about things within this framework. I don't know if it works exactly that way in the US version of this, but the problem is the same. The contraction of people who are tuning in and the loss of revenue.
You mean in terms of the comparison?
Yeah, it's why we got Z Patriot squealing. Yeah, and why we're seeing Trump's, podcast bros are flipping as well. It's all about the money and what story you have to spin to get paid.
And the comparison between Trump and Putin is a fascinating one, because Trump has so many times said that he wants to be like Putin. Is he like Putin? The whole interview, the statement by Fiona Hill on that statement, by the way, Jonathan, great interview the other day.
Jealous, very jealous.
Right.
It was
Yes,
wonderful.
we all are, Philip. We all are very jealous. Yes.
I have to admit that is an old one that a lot of people didn't notice the date on it. So that was an old one that was sort of re-edited for the bits that were still relevant. I've been trying to do a follow-up.
I would just love to interact with that accent for about 45 minutes. That's enough. I mean,
it was fabulous. I mean, I should say that for the recorded sort of 30-minute interview, because at the time this was done in 2023, Fiona was in a real rush to sort of get away, but we did have like a 10-minute conversation prior to hitting record. And at one point she's asking me, so do you think we did the right thing? What do you think of our policies? I'm like, this is insane. Being asked about the architect of, the US policy towards, whether what did I think of those? And yeah, that was fairly mind blowing.
It's a nice disarming communication approach.
Yes.
Yeah. But she did point out that Trump wanted to be like Putin, and I think that Trump is just more like Putin on steroids, because he's got a lot more options and things, that levers at his disposal than Putin does. But at the same time, Trump has a lot more consequences for his actions than Putin does, because Putin can screw up all day long. He's screwing up this war for 14 years, but it's in Russia. It's okay. But for Trump, there's supposedly consequences, elections, all of that kind of stuff. So that's just kind of seems like they are similar, but they're in different contexts.
Yeah. And this is a question for you two. Obviously, both of you having much more skin in the game, as it were. Are you like me? Do you find it sort of terrifying to see how far Trump's come, but also reassuring that he couldn't go all the way, that he's found some of the limitations on how he can, manipulate the system? Or are we not at the end of this yet? I mean, is that premature to think that he has discovered the limitations on how far he can deform and push the US system?
Well, I mean, the thing that exists in the United States is a system of counterbalance that has, been abandoned by, unfortunately, the Senate, the judiciary. We're supposed to have 3 branches of power, and the executive is just gone nuts. But there are still governors who govern their own states. There are federal judges who are in certain districts, and so there are ways to, if not completely stop Trump, then certainly delay his tactics and put a spanner in the works. Whereas the Kremlin, the only excuse that puts the bubble around the czar is if the czar only knew. I mean, it's always an apparatchik. It's always a subordinate that is to blame and will be easily and without a second thought thrown under the bus. So the systems don't work the same way, even though the president has the power of the executive and the power of the pulpit, and he has the Oval and the Resolute desk. Putin has everything. I mean, yes, there are power dynamics, but he's the czar. So he has the ability to differentiate himself from the system itself and from the faults in the system and the complaints. So it's a little bit of apples and oranges, but certainly Trump would love to be able to bypass every other aspect of power within the United States. And if he could, he would. Putin doesn't nearly have that kind of issue to deal with on a daily basis.
Before you joined, Phil, we were talking about the Moscow Economic Forum, and it sounds like for the first time we are getting some rumblings, however, of discontent in the Putin system. Not that it's out revolution or whatever, not that any of these people want to overturn the system, the vertical of power.
Well, I remember Voloshin and Yeltsin, And when there was blood in the water, the sharks began to circle quite quickly. So I'm sorry I missed that part of your discussion, because you might very well be right. Between the Z blog, millisphere or whatever it is, grumblings we hear within the military itself, or society predominantly young being cut off from their favorite drug that they love, which is social media and the internet, and the how convenient it is to use things like Telegram or their contact payment for the metro or whatever, things like that. Though that while not nearly as bad as it was with Voloshin and the daughters in the late 90s, the thing about, and I'll be very careful with this, but the thing is that once that blood, that even that first drop of blood leads to more drops of blood, and then it spreads, and then it gets, and then the feeding frenzy starts. And that's what every czar has been worried about. Every Russian leader, even during the Soviet Union, always worried about, would the sharks or the boyars or the Politburo suddenly start to, orchestrate, looking past them to perhaps even becoming the power itself. So it's slightly different than how it works in the States.
I think that's it. We misinterpret it over and over again. We think that the discontent is arising because of the repression, because of the war, because of this, using our own framework with some kind of political morality. I don't think it works like that at all. I think the discontent arises when the strong man is seen as a weak strong man, when he's no longer able to command fear and keep that vertical in its place and keep people in their places within it. And of course, part of that fear is also the ability to provide sort of largesse and privileges and revenues. And I think that idea of revenues and weakness, once you stop sort of feeding the vertical, and once you can no longer maintain order within that vertical, as you say, that's when the blood and the water is there. That's when people move very quickly, because the last thing they want to do is to have chaos on the one hand, smutne vremena, or lose their revenues, or both. Yuri, what do you think of that little hypothesis here?
I don't know. I think that their revenues and all the good things that they're going to lose, I don't know. They're going to survive this somehow, because the thing that makes me that stands out to me about Putin is something that I heard, I think, originally Kirill Rogov, who was a really good analyst, and possibly the best thing I heard at the whole conference I went to once about Russia in 2019 in San Francisco, ACES. And the Kirill Rogov pointed out that in Russia, Putin is the head of the legal enterprise and of the illegal. So he's the main law enforcer agent, and he's also the main crime boss. And so that kind of a duplicative role is kind of important. And so I'm thinking, to what extent is what we're seeing with our president is with his pardon approach, where he can pardon anybody, and so he does that whenever he feels like it. To what extent he's fostering that kind of a Godfather reputation, the fact that he pardoned all the people involved in January 6th, and so on and so on. So it's an interesting dynamic. Again, if Trump wants to be like Putin, then what does that look like? It's fascinating. But I think that Russia, I guess, to just go back to your point, I feel like that the economic pie has been shrinking in Russia for a long time. They're used to eating each other. Somebody survives, somebody goes out the window, and then somebody goes out the window tomorrow. But the pie is shrinking, and to what extent does this mean that they're going to break off in fiefdoms? No, I think Putin seems to still control the whole operation, again, being controlling it on both ends. I think this enterprise just continues. This, I guess, maybe that's where conversation shifts to: is Russia going to attack Baltic states and NATO? Because maybe that's a good way to distract the conversation from how poorly things are going in Russia, in media and in reality. I don't know.
Yeah. Ooh, boy, if he attacked the Baltics, though. I mean, that's our Article 5, cut and dried. It is ultimately that. I mean, that's exactly what it is. So, I take your point, though. I'm not sure the U.S. matters anymore. I say that. I think that there are growing alternatives to the U.S. Being the de facto leadership of NATO. There are other nations, and that doesn't include our neighbors to the north in Canada, and Europe is stepping up its game significantly. Maybe it isn't a NATO reaction. Maybe it's not Article 5. Maybe it's some other kind of allied agreement. But I don't see the West allowing an attack on the Baltics to go unanswered. And by that, I mean non-militarily. There would be a military reaction to an attack. The Kremlin can jump up and down and scream as much as it wants about Ukrainian drones, using Polish and Baltic airspace to launch attacks with drones, to fly through their airspace, and they can jump up and down as much as they would like. But as we also know, they draw red lines quite often. And when those red lines are crossed, at the end of the day, they don't really do anything about it. There would have to be a reaction. The West would have no choice but to make some sort of military reaction to. And now, how effective would it be if say the United States did say, nothing to do with us. We don't care about Article 5. As a matter of fact,
should have given us Greenland. Should have given us Greenland.
Shouldn't have given it. Exactly. You were so snarky about you didn't give us any help in the strait. You didn't send a ship. So screw you guys anyhow. Why should we come to help the Baltics? And
that's how it'll go down. That is exactly how it'll go down. You weren't there for us. We're not here for you.
Oh, you can totally see it, but it will not be as devastating as I think some are anticipating, because I do think that Europe and transatlantically Canada are very much waking up to the fact that the only way to deal with Russia is to hit them hard. They're bullies, so hit them hard in the nose. So if Russian forces, whether they be air or land, do anything within the Baltics, I don't see a space where the West just goes, it's going to make more of a mess. It's going to make more trouble. Whether that means more aid to Ukraine because this is the front line, or whether that means, actively getting engaged in something going on in the Baltics, I don't know. I that's a crystal ball I'm not willing to peer into. But
the thing that I keep hearing is that Gotland Island.
Can't ignore it. Sorry?
Gotland Island. The thing that I keep hearing last few days is Gotland Island.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be poking the reverse of poking the bear. I mean, you don't want to mess with Sweden, and in fact, I think the monarch of Sweden.
Let me write that down. I didn't know that. You don't want to mess with Sweden. All right,
don't mess with Sweden.
Okay. All right.
No, I think militarily,
don't mess with Texas, but this don't mess with Sweden. Love it.
No, I think Sweden is a lot more, let's say, woken up. And tooled up for the Russian threat than, say, the UK is. Traditionally, the UK would have been the leader, as it were, within Europe. But Denmark, Finland, Sweden, I think, are far more prepared for what's coming militarily.
Norwegians.
Norwegians as well.
Don't fool with the Norwegians.
Don't mess with Norway as well.
if the Swedes get pulled in,
Yeah.
if the Swedes get pulled in, Norway will get pulled in as well.
Yes,
It's
yes.
an inevitability. And
Finland,
do
of
not
course. Yeah.
well, yes. And now that even without being a partnership in NATO, I think Finland would be
I don't
drawn
understand.
in that
Have they
situation.
forgotten Alexander Nevsky? They them and their horses, and they're ooh, that's gonna be, and, well, the lake's gonna melt. It's gonna be there. What were they thinking?
Exactly. I mean, one of the things I covered in the disastrous state of the British military is at the moment we are borrowing 14 artillery pieces from Sweden, and they've asked for them back, and we're like, yeah, but that would leave us with almost nothing left. So we're not in a good position. We're also and I think this is unfortunately where Trump, maybe in his own way, has a point. He's been mocking the Royal Navy, its capability, so is Hegseth, but we recently took over, I think, the lead on a sort of Northern Seas Baltic NATO mission, but we didn't have any ships from which to lead that operation. We had we had the admirals and whatever it was. So again, we are, I would say, borrowing a German ship, which is nominally under British control, as it were, as part of this exercise.
Doesn't the British Empire have those beautiful ships with those beautiful sails? And
I mean, not anymore. Well, we got a few in museums.
Nelson would be rolling in his grave.
He would, like the Russians rolling out the T-55s. We can maybe bring a couple of wooden sailing ships to the party, but we're in a disastrous state. Yes, it's tool up the Cutty Sark.
Roll the Cutty Sark out from Greenwich and get it going.
It's just catastrophic, and I think the three people who helped to write the national defense policy that recommended they made, I think it was 21 or 23 points or 65. I can't remember how many points it was. I did an episode just yesterday, but they made 62. I think they made 62 recommendations. The government accepted all of them, said, yeah, we're going to do all of this. And they haven't done any of it. That document, agreed last year, is still sitting on the Prime Minister's desk unsigned, not because necessarily he disagrees with anything that's in it, just the funds aren't there, and the Treasury is saying no. Treasury says no. We're in a disastrous state of preparedness. Fiona Hill, who we talked about a minute ago, has said that this is bizarre, and other authors of that report have said that it's devastating, that it's worrying, that it's disastrous, and we're asleep at the wheel. So unfortunately, there's, we have to agree with some of the detractors there, that the UK is not leading in this.
I feel like we didn't even really do like proper introductions, and I would love to hear more about like Philip's channel, because I just I would love to hear more about because
I'd love to have you. I'd love to have you on as a guest. It's basically I came here and quickly realized that I am no longer a young man, and that frontline news coverage is perhaps for another person. And also, I just wasn't happy with the content I was producing. I'm a veteran of 30 years of broadcast television, and I'm used to having a cameraman and a producer and a team effort and really putting out a polished report. So I wasn't happy with my reportage. So I decided to build a studio in Kiev where people could come to me, or we could do remote interviews, and that would be instead of me running around the front, which I shouldn't be doing at my age anyhow. Instead of that I would do these kind of interviews. So we've been doing, it's called On the Edge, comes out every Sunday at 8 p.m. Kiev time. And we do about an hour-long interview with people who are either experts in one form or another that's important to the war, or we try and profile as many Ukrainian voices as possible. Actually, it's as Jonathan knows, I can run at the mouth sometimes, but this does allow me to bring up a point, is that we've been off the air for about 2 months almost 2 months now. And that is a result of the massive attack on the electrical grid in Kiev that happened at the beginning of February. I returned from the United States after the holidays, and I was on for about 3 weeks. And then we had this massive attack on our electrical grid, and it destroyed the electrical system, our circuit within the studio. So first we had to rebuild and repair the circuitry internally within the studio, which has been turned into a proper, well, I like to think a proper production. Jonathan, you've been there. You can attest to it, whether or not it's true, but we like to call it, it's soundproofed and good mics and good lights and things like that. So we lost our electrical system within the actual building studio itself because of a surge, because the electrical grid was so messed up. Then we had the local provider had to come and fix that. And then ultimately, even the local provider had to say, no, this is something you need to go to the city for. This is a municipal problem between the line that you have to your circuit board and the centralized power station, which is how things are done in Kiev. And I only tell you this extended story, not only to excuse our absence, but also to say that when the Russians are attacking the electrical grid and infrastructure, utility infrastructure within Ukraine, whether it's here in Kiev or anywhere else, we recently had a very, very serious attack 2 nights ago. But it is not simply the lights or the signal lights or the things that are used to keep the kind of city working, but it goes down and down and down to certain other levels where it actually, the citizenry is of course deeply affected, and not just like the lights are out for a few hours or a few days even, which of course happens, but it does damage to the actual infrastructure electricians right now are in very, very high demand. They're very busy. It took me 2 months to get 3 visits from these 3 different guys to say, well, okay, I can fix your room. And then the guy that said, oh, I can fix your connection to the grid, but ultimately you need to have your connection to the central power station. That needs to be fixed. And that took 2 months, so it's the ramifications to society of attacks on our utility, electricity grid, water, heating, things like that. This winter was extremely difficult and extremely damaging to not just Kiev, but I know to a lot of other cities. And I know the Ukrainians civil engineers are going to be scrambling now that we have better weather so that we're prepared for next winter. But I am deeply afraid of, if this war, sadly, and it does look like it, will continue into another winter, this network, these utilities are at the near breaking point. So, but we are, for now, we have our first episode with the wonderful Natalia Lutsenko, who does the English language version of Ukraine 24. She does a lot of work for them. She is our guest this week, and we are finally back on the air. I am extremely proud of my team. I am extremely proud to say that we're back. And if I can have a little bit of hubris, the Russians aren't going to stop us. We're going to keep trying to do the information war. We're going to do the same thing that both of you are doing, I know, and that is bringing consciousness to the Ukrainian conflict, what this means globally, regionally, and all the rest of it. But also from our own part, our priority is to humanize and profile Ukrainians and people with unique Ukrainian voices. So there you go, Yuri. And again, I did warn you. Jonathan knows very well I can get on my soapbox.
No, that was great. I actually have a couple of questions. First of all, can you say a little bit more, share, since you are in Kiev right now? What has it been like especially the last few days, where it seems like Putin has been turning up the pressure, and you're still there, and I salute you for being there. So can you be a
Two nights
reporter?
ago,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll put on my reporter hat again. 2 nights ago was horrible. I mean, really deeply intense. We had a strike within Podil. Those of you who know Kiev know that Podil is a very, very central, very high density population area. It's kind of seen as the bohemian part of Kiev, and they took a hit to a high rise. Last I saw, it was 5 dead there. I know they hit into Dnipro as well, but I can only personally attest to what happened here in Kiev, and it was, as happens, it doesn't happen as often as perhaps some perceive, but I would say almost on a weekly to a 10-day basis, somewhere at that period of time, you'll come under heavy attack, and it's a terrifying feeling, and that's not to say that we also don't get air raid sirens every day warning us of potential attacks, which of course affects your psyche. There's a massive toll on your mental health. The society is holding up, but it is strained, deeply strained. You walk down the streets of Kiev and you see people on their mobile phones or cell phones weeping into the phone, and you don't really have to ask why. You see young men walking the streets with, injuries that are either, being healed or are so grievous that they're now using prosthetics or, crutches or missing limbs or, what have you. And that constant drone of the air siren, which is psychologically so damaging. The people of Kiev, the people of Ukraine have suffered and continue to suffer at a really extraordinary level. And yet everyone, I was just down in Podil myself to kind of wander around and see if I could find this building. I didn't in the end, but I went in to have lunch and a beer at a little pub in Podil, and struck up a conversation with a guy between his, bad English and my bad Russian. We had this, conversation about, so much of this. And we both kind of sighed and said, but what can we do? What alternative do we have? So they.
But you do have an alternative.
I am an alternative as an American, but I'm an idiot. I made a promise. I was on Maidan in 2014, and I stupidly made a promise to the people on Maidan that I would win and not if, because that's how it was always proposed to me, was when the Russians come, please don't forget about us. Because that's been tragically part of Ukraine's history, is that the West has either forgotten them or has used them as a chess piece in a larger imperial game that they play with, going back centuries, whatever empire you want to talk about, Austro-Hungarian, Polish-Lithuanian, Russian, of course, Ottoman. So many empires have crossed through this land and abused it. And I was on Maidan, and I foolishly, when they said, "Не забывай нас," don't forget about us. When they come, don't forget about us, because we've been forgotten about, we've been abandoned before. And I stupidly said, "Ya обещаю," I promise. And so when the full-scale invasion happened, I got on a plane, and I'm too old and fat to run around on the front line, but I've got 30 years of broadcast news journalism under my belt. So I decided to bring those skill sets to bear. And that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years. And I cannot wait until I can crack a bottle of champagne on Kupiansk and then hop on a plane out of Borispil and fly back to, dip my toes at my cottage in Michigan and never think about war again. I've covered over a dozen wars. I was in Iraq. I was in Afghanistan, Syria, Lebanon, Libya. I've been in many, many wars. And I had hoped never to see another one, but I was on Maidan and I made that damn stupid promise. And so I'm here and I'm going to stick it out with them. Not only because of that promise, but as I think you both will agree, this is a woefully underreported story, and it is a story of great importance. And it's our obligation for those of us who see the threat and see the consequence of a loss. I don't know what that means, but let's just use that word temporarily for now. A loss for the West to an ascendant Putin Kremlin would be disastrous for everybody. So I'm here because I promised, and I'm here because I believe that this is probably the most important war I'll ever cover, and that includes Iraq and Afghanistan.
So there's a nice comment here. How long before Philip gets bored at his Michigan lake house and is off?
Right.
Something again.
As I said before, I decided to come to this stupid war because I had hoped I'd left war behind me. That in order to avoid getting bored, I would do things like documentaries about nice things instead. Like the migratory pattern of the monarch butterfly, or the history of the Pacific Coast Ocean, or Pacific Coast Highway, or the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald or something. I don't know, something that doesn't have to do with global geopolitics, war, death, pain, destruction, all the rest of it. So I hope I won't get bored. I suspect I won't. I've had a stomach full of war.
So yeah, I was saying Michigander, eh?
Michigander and a Californian mix.
Before we go further, let's get the fundraiser links up if we can from the comments from time to time, because I think it's worth reminding people. We always see, the donations spike up a little bit when those are on the screen. I think they're going to be somewhere in the comments list. There we go.
Absolutely.
Yep, we got a couple. So been trying to cycle through them. The other thing, Philip, that Jonathan and I started discussing is Jonathan calls it an inflection point. I call it the end of the beginning, but you're actually living in it. So can you tell us, is this just perception, where it looks like while Ukraine is suffering, civilians are going through this difficult life, at the same time, Ukraine seems to have gained control over the front lines where 94 to 96% of Russian invaders are now killed by drones. So does it feel like there's something changing, or does this feel like this is just a story of Ukrainian resilience?
Well, being in Kiev, it's a little bit hard to answer that because people in Kiev do tend to be a little bit distanced from the actual fighting. But I did go to a near frontline position about 6 weeks ago. I went along the Zaporizhia front area. Still can't say exactly where, but it was about 15 kilometers off of the zero line, and I spent it with drone guys, and I saw how the drone, but it was a battalion of drone operators, and I saw how they operated, and I saw their adaptability, I saw their capability, capacity of what they can put out on a daily basis. I saw how they coordinated and did command and control. I saw how they did logistics. again, I've been covering wars for over 20 years, and I see how armies work. I see, all of these factors, again, command and control, morale, take your pick. And these guys, they were working 24/7. Some were 3D printing drones. Some were operating on modifying drones, taking pro-am drones and swapping out the Chinese chips because they didn't trust them with domestically created communication and control chips. That I don't know who makes them or where they make them, but they're getting rid of the Chinese elements and they're inserting their own. I saw them repairing, drones that are meant to be bomber drones. These big the Vampire, drones that drop mortar shells. I saw how they dispersed their production capabilities and the command capabilities. And it was all incredibly impressive. And it was, the morale was high. They were determined to continue fighting. They were very much involved with the point of being like 15 kilometers off the front line was that they could get an order from a frontline position saying we have X, Y, or Z element coming at us, whether it's armor, mechanized infantry, large scale infantry, individual infantry going through tunnels and trenches. So we need an FPV drone for those guys. We need those guys who are in a bunker. We saw them go in there. We need an FPV to fly down into the trench and hit those guys. Oh, there's a piece of armor. There's a BTR that's coming from this direction. So what we need is something that can drop heavier ordnance. And it was all extremely well coordinated and organized. And again, the morale was high. It wasn't, nobody was having a vacation, but they were determined. They were optimistic, within reason. But nobody was talking about retreat or surrender or, giving up, basically. They were going to hold that land with whatever they possibly could. And they were going to try and take back as much territory as they possibly could. Going out there and talking to those guys gave me a shot in the arm. I still think the people of Ukraine are dead set against coming under Moscow's thumb ever again. I've been to the front lines out in the east. I've seen the fortifications leading up to the fortress cities. They fight over Chasiv Yar or Pokrovsk for months on end and lose tens of thousands of soldiers, and they gain very, very little. And that's Chasiv Yar. That's as I say, Pokrovsk. What's going to happen when they get to a town like Kramatorsk, Sloviansk? Those are cities that are built for hundreds of people, and they're heavily industrialized. You have factories, you have smelting plants, you have coal kind of refinement, and these factories that work with sifting out coal. All to mean it's heavily industrial, and those could be turned. They say they're fortress cities, but if the actual contact between the armed forces of Russia and the armed forces of Ukraine actually did come to conflict within those fortress cities, it's gonna be a long, hard fight. I can't say for sure that Ukraine would win it, but it would come at a massive cost to the Russians, and it would be months and months of fighting. And then there are, then we go in further into what they have is defense in depth. They have long trenches and anti-tank positions and things and the landscape of Donbass, much of Donbass, are these wide open sloping plains with no cover whatsoever. And then it comes to kind of like a bocage, comes to a row of trees. And then the process begins again and again and again. Long, low gradient, sloping open fields up into a division line, where all you need to do is put a bunch of Ukrainian guys, with javelins in those tree lines and trench lines, and any approaching Russian armor is going to be absolutely exposed. And that's traditional warfare. Then we go into the drone warfare.
All right, Philip. I just would like
the
to.
Russians are outnumbering them, but the Ukrainian skill level is very high. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, we have one more guest, and that's why I just wanted to make sure that everybody's included in the conversation. I'm really excited to have
Hey guys, Philip,
friend.
Yuri, how are you? Welcome, guys.
How are you, love?
I'm good.
It's lovely to see you.
Hi, Jonathan. Pleasure to meet you guys.
Hi there. Great to meet you. Yeah, first time, I think.
I think so. Yes, Jonathan. I think it's the first time. Definitely pleasure to meet you. Thank you, Yuri, for having me. I apologize for the tire, but I'm in Washington D.C. and my daughter say hi. Say hi. So
I'll send hello to your uncle.
Please, yeah, he's Alexander. Definitely. So how are you guys? What's going on?
We're doing great. We're doing a bit of a fundraiser for Ukraine, but also wanted to, awesome. Take advantage of your expertise and knowledge. Of course, you are running for Congress, which is really exciting. But so I guess if you wanted to start by sharing what made you want to do it.
Oh, well, thank you guys for having me. But by the way, everybody that is supporting Ukraine, God bless each and every one of you, because Ukraine needs every single support it needs right now, especially the past 36 hours. If you've seen the diabolical attacks onto Ukraine, Kiev, Odessa, double taps, and so on.
It wasn't a lot of fun, Lev.
I know. I was on the phone with Docs. I actually wrote a letter today on my Substack about it, where we do a show with Kevin Harbaugh. Actually, right now we're partnering up with Midas actually to give it a bigger exposure of Voice from Ukraine, to be able to give people an inside look of what really is happening. Because right now the media is all bunched up with what's happening in the Middle East, Iran, and everything else, and that is Putin's game.
I'm always just a phone call away, Lev.
Oh no, you're absolutely
or an email. I'm at your disposal, 100%.
We're actually planning on trying to put together a State Department trip in May. We're trying to figure out to go down to Ukraine to start making some changes. But Congress, great question. Not a political guy, as you guys know. Those of you that know me, I'm as far from politics as possible, but ended up getting involved in politics because of my relationship with Donald Trump, because of him sending me to Ukraine and having me do basically start up a shadow diplomacy for him. A shadow diplomacy that he currently still controls and runs, but just has different people in there. Instead of Lev Parnas and Rudy Giuliani, now you have Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. And it's basically, at the end of the day, the same plan, same motives, and same apparatus and same people behind the scenes. I started speaking out after my arrest, as you guys know, and as we keep speaking truth to power. I've testified in Congress under oath. I've had a documentary made. I wrote a book, and I have a big platform on Substack, YouTube, and other social media where I go every day, break news, talk about all the corruption that's going on, all the problems. But the problem is that not enough people hear about it, not enough people see about it, and really we're not able to make change. And I'm not looking to be a social media guy. I'm looking to actually make change. And, I sat down with my wife, my family, and we try to figure out what's the best way we could help our country at a time like this. And being in a position where I am, lived through what I lived through, seen what I seen, and very few people have seen the corruption from the inside the way I've seen it, being in the Trump first administration, and then most of the players played out right now are in the same people in his second administration. What you're seeing be played out in Venezuela, those are some of my ex-partners that were in the first administration with them that are still continuously working at the deals in Venezuela. Obviously, you guys know my connections overseas in Russia, Ukraine, and all the oligarchy there is one of the reasons Trump sent me over there and put pressure on Zelensky because of my background, going back all the way to the 90s and, growing up in that world. So I decided that, the best way I could help my country, the best way I could help Ukraine, the world, is by, speaking truth to power in a place where, it matters. And that's, in Washington, D.C., Congress, Senate. And I decided to run for the 27th District of Florida. It's a unique district made up of immigrants like myself, even though they might not be from Russia or Ukraine or, Eastern Europe. They're immigrants that have gone through the same type of dictatorship, authoritarianship, survivalship that we have grown up in the Soviet Union and places like that, Venezuela, Colombia, Cuba, same type of individuals, and something that Trump is right now using as a main platform with Vladimir Putin to be able to exploit and use this corruption power. So that's why I threw my hat in the ring, and that's why this race is not just for the 27th District of Florida, but I'm also running a national campaign to be able to help all the Democratic leadership across the nation. But I want to also make it clear that I'm not a establishment Democrat. I am not running on behalf of Chuck Schumer or Senator Jeffries or any of these guys. The establishment needs to go. This is, I'm running for a new Democratic Party, a Democratic Party that needs leaders, people that are willing to stand up, fighters, young blood, not the old corruption that's been sitting there for 30, 40 years, making backroom deals behind themselves and, using that, money to be able to enrich themselves in the trading. So that's the main reason I chose to run.
That's fantastic. Can I jump in, Yuri, and ask get
Yeah.
a first question in there? Because Lev, I follow you, I follow Anthony Scaramucci to try and get an idea of what's going on in Trump's head. They seem to be, you and he seem to be, closer in terms of interpreting what may be going on and what may be driving some of the decisions. It seems that the tools of traditional politics are just not going to work. And of course, things like New York Times and so on will default to a sort of almost a sane washing or a normalization, but they'll miss what's actually going on, the real intentions. Vis-a-vis Ukraine, is your impression that Trump is simply looking for deals, looking for grift, looking for self-interest, or is there something more? Is he looking to bring about a situation where Ukraine needs to capitulate, that Ukraine is going to be defeated? Because that, of course, is the Russian aim. But I can't figure out whether he's aligned with that or whether he's just looking for a situation where he can potentially benefit.
Great question, Jonathan. And that's something I speak about all the time because I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding, misconstruction of what Donald Trump actually thinks of Ukraine. And I speak about it all the time. And I try to, me and Yuri have done plenty of shows where we go on Ukrainian channels. And I told the people even before Trump got elected, I said, he is not a friend to Ukraine. Donald Trump has never been a friend to Ukraine. Donald Trump didn't know where Ukraine existed on the map. He considered Ukrainians and Russians the same people as no, you can't have anyone. Hold on a second. Okay, pretend. I'm sorry, guys. So Donald Trump, in his first administration, I was the person that actually told him about Ukraine, that Ukraine are fighters, and started the whole thing. Ukraine has a very sour taste in Donald Trump's mouth that it's beyond actual financial issues. It's the whole 2016 Russiagate. It's Rudy Giuliani and people in his orbit at that time. And I was one of them. As part of manipulating and explaining to Trump that it wasn't the Russians that were involved. It was basically those corrupt Ukrainians that were involved with the corrupt Democratic leadership and the deep state that internally interfered into the election and stole the information and did everything to hurt you and blame the Russians. And for Trump, Russiagate has become like a sticking point, as you guys could see. And that actually drove his friendship and to what we're seeing with Putin, because, well, a lot of people don't know in the first administration, Trump had no relationship with Putin. There were people on the inside of Trump's orbit, like Manafort, others, people like myself that had connections overseas, and even people like Michael Cohen, and even his own son Don Jr. and others had more connections to people in that world. Donald Trump was just more the face, but he had no actual relationship with Putin. He admired Putin. He looked up to him because Donald Trump grew up in that stronghold man type of era where first he lived under his dictatorship under his father Fred. After that, he got his mentor became Roy Cohen, who was a famous mafia lawyer, and then passed away. And he introduced him to that world of the underworld, the underbelly, and understanding. That's why you see a lot of what Trump does is like a mobster. People say the media compares him to it because a lot of people have never met a mobster around the world or around the country. A lot of people have never been around, so they have no understanding. They have the perception of television, and thinking, oh, it's just basically a comparison. But no, Donald Trump is a real mobster. He grew up in the 70s around people like Fat Tony Salerno, who ran the Genovese crime family, and others like Sammy the Bull Gravano, John Gotti, to be able to build the buildings and do the things he did in the New York City and also in his casinos in New Jersey. So Donald Trump grew up around that world, but the dictatorship world was a lot farther away. It was a lot more powerful. Donald Trump was a local guy. He was a New York guy. And he was always took that as an anger because he would always be looked down at Davos. He was never invited to Davos, for instance, or where all the financial billionaires would meet up. He was always, shunned by the world, and he had a chip on the shoulder. That type of chip on the shoulder that he's the great Donald Trump. So when it comes to Ukraine and Russia, it's very simple. It's not even complicated. He looks at Russia as a strong, powerful country. He still looks at it going back to the Soviet Union times. That's what's embedded in his head, and that's what people around him have convinced him into it, that the media doesn't know the power of Russia. Basically, Russia is stronger, more powerful than it really is. And he believes in it. And he truly believes that Ukraine is not that are weaklings. He looks at them as second class people. He doesn't, he doesn't look at them on the same level as Russians do. So because of that, it's, he's basically waiting for, he's been promised this whole year by Dmitriev, by Putin, by others, by Witkoff and others, that Russia would already take over Ukraine. And that's his biggest frustration. Not that, the fact that he's having issues with, what's it called, Iran. His biggest frustration is that Putin has not done what he promised him and taken over Ukraine already, because strategically that wouldn't have allowed what's taking place in Iran if Putin would have done what he have done. And make a long story short, Trump is not a friend to Ukraine. He never was, though I don't think he ever will be. I think he's looking at Ukraine as basically something that is going to fall. It's just a matter of time. And then he's going to be able to go in there with his big corporate, donors that are going to be able to take over from rebuilding the real estate, energy, minerals. And the crazy part, it's all being coordinated with the Russians, because at the end of the day, it's Kushner and Witkoff that are coordinated with Kirill Dmitriev through Putin of how even the rebuildment of Ukraine is going to go. So that's the head they're on.
And who do you recommend? Who do you think actually sort of gets the Trump mindset, gets the sort of the thought processes there? Because there are a couple of people. There's Michael Cohen, of course. There's Michael Wolff, of course, the biographer. Anthony Scaramucci. They all seem to sort of claim sort of insider knowledge, let's say, of his thought processes. Do you think those are reliable sources? Or?
Absolutely not. Those are, two of the three are grifters and garbage, and that I'm exposing around that are, Michael Wolff and Michael Cohen. First of all, they don't know Donald Trump. They know the old Donald Trump. They have not been around Donald Trump for over a decade. Michael Cohen, knows Donald Trump from the early 2000s when he was working for him as a fixer, and that's all he knows. He doesn't know the Donald Trump prior to that, and doesn't know the Donald Trump after he came into office, because when Donald Trump came into office, he got rid of Michael Cohen, and he has changed in the past 10 years drastically. He's not the same Donald Trump that you saw in 2015 that was running for office. So to have, and Michael Wolff is another character. Michael Wolff was not a Donald Trump, somebody that knew Donald Trump as well as he knew as Epstein and Bannon, and who was working behind the scenes. And that's some of the stuff that we've been uncovering in the Epstein files. I work very closely with the House Judiciary Committee here on the Hill in the White House. And I could tell you the fact that Michael Wolff was, with Steve Bannon playing and with Epstein playing Donald Trump. So these people really, Anthony Scaramucci also, I know Mooch, he's a good guy. Out of the three of them, Mooch is solid. Me and him actually were in Israel back in 2018 when he just was still supporting Trump. And he knows, I'll tell you, because he has a pulse of the people around him from the financial world. I'd say he has a pretty good, Mooch has definitely a good inside track because of the people he's around, because it's not just Trump. You have to, I always say, Trump is a phenomenon. He's just a person, but there's also the people that make him who he is, and the people that made Hitler who he was, the people that made Mussolini who he was, is all the enablers. It's the people that are now around him that are allowing him to do it, because if they would just shut him down, he wouldn't be able to do what he does. If they would just, if all of a sudden Congress and the Senate turned around and said, no, we're going to impeach you, he wouldn't even be around here right now. So the fact that he is being enabled by all of these, nuts in our society that are allowing him to do these type of right wing, white Christian national movement type of situations. I mean, I think. That's a big problem. But yeah, out of the three of them, I think Mooch would say has the closest from the financial. But I don't think, definitely Michael Cohen, Michael Wolff, I have no idea. They're just grifters on platforms trying to pretend, sell books and movies talking about how they knew him from 10 years ago. But in the meantime, if you really take a look at people like Michael Wolff and Michael Cohen, they have never done and never spoke out against Donald Trump. Michael Cohen is actually now going on a campaign talking about how he was coerced by Letitia James and to speak up against Donald Trump. So these are people that are, were as dirty as Trump in his world, and they keep manipulating the system. So they don't know. The people that know Donald Trump are very few and far right now, because it's a different animal. The beast that was even in 2015, 16 is not the same. The reason why I know Donald Trump so well, not because I only spent so much time with him while he was already in the White House. I was the last person with him. So that's the difference between me and Michael Wolff. They were there in the past. They could talk about what he did 20, 30 years ago. They weren't with him, and they were not around what was going on while he was in the White House, which I was. Then, after he left the White House, and then his second reign coming back in the White House, also his circle tightened. And when the circle tightened, that's why most of the, information that you're hearing from people, sources, and that is all false, because you're seeing there it's part of a organized campaign where they leak certain information, especially to be able to distract from what really is happening. The reason why I'm different is not only because I was with him during the White House, but because when I was there, I was the gatekeeper between Trump, Rudy, and I allowed a lot of people to get into a lot of positions that they are currently still in, and that are very, how do you say, scared for people to find out that I put them there, or they have any association with me, because of the wrath that they would get to Trump. So because of that, I still have relationships all over Trump world and internationally that I'm able to still break and report some of the stuff.
I have a couple of questions, but I gotta say, Lev, you do such an amazing job of like setting things up, and then you just explain it, and I'm going, well, I guess that answered that question. But but do you think that I think one of the big things we're trying to figure out with Trump is to what extent he's motivated by fear of what Putin may have in his folder in the Trump file, of course, perhaps probably with Epstein's help, or to what extent is he motivated by the financial rewards of Dmitriev and so on? How does that balance out in his behavior, do you find?
Great question. I think it's a combination. Well, I definitely know it's a combination. The fear part of it is not something that drives him. It's more the financial part of it that drives him. The fear is more of like, he knows it's out there. You know what I'm saying to you? There was a time, I don't remember if we even did this. I think we spoke about one of your shows, Yuri, even a few months back, if I don't remember. But there was a time where they actually started having these conversations, and through Witkoff, it was, Dmitriev at one point basically spilled some of the tea and gave information having to do with Epstein files. Not so much the Epstein files, but see, that's what people understand, is that Donald Trump was being basically followed, looked at from the day he married Ivana Trump. Since from there on, he was always part of a group of people that the KGB always tried to always have information. Influential people around the United States. I mean, it still happens. It's nothing new. It's not. They just hit the jackpot by him getting into the White House. They never assumed that they could have such a corrupt, such somebody that has all of these, points on it to be able to get to the White House. So when you look at all of those points, you start to see a man that is really, what is Donald Trump about? It's about money, power, finance. That is why he became such a perfect agent for Russia. When I say agent, it's a lot of different ways you could word that. Somebody that works as an officer, somebody that just gets information. But Donald Trump was definitely working with the Russian knowingly or unknowingly through the early years of his life. The other part is a lot of people in Donald Trump's life, like Epstein, like Howard Lutnick, like Steve Witkoff, had their own relationships in the early 90s with this Russian oligarchy. Because if you remember and recall, that's how Putin and Russia, when the fall of the Soviet Union, one of the plans was to take all the funds and money that they had were taken into these oligarchs and spread them all over the world to start investing, buying all of these very specific properties, energy companies, coal companies, specific real estate properties and all of that, to be able to intertwine themselves into world society where eventually they would have a say in a lot of things. Through that, they started using foreign money to be able to infiltrate not only the UK, but also the United States through the lobbyist systems, through the sport, putting money through these super PACs, the special interest type of groups, to be able to start manipulating and using the congressional people and leadership for what Russia and their people need. So for Trump, it's both. It's a combination of money, and that's what drives him to do it. But at the end of the day, he knows that him and Putin are tied at the hip, because there's also information, and not just with the Epstein files. Remember, if you take a look at Trump's history, every single time he got bailed out when it came financially, from 87 to 96 to 2000, all of those times came from Russian money. It came from Russian oligarchy. All the people surrounding Donald Trump, like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, all of these people, also all of their companies, if you take a look at the beginning of their companies, also came from a lot, had to do with Russian oligarchy money. And that's where the real ties and links them, because it starts financially, but then, obviously these people have to have certain, blackmail over each other to be able to run. That's the world it is. That's why I call it shadow diplomacy.
Thank you, Lev. Perhaps some other folks would like to chime in, because I'm glad that we have somebody else. Yes.
Yeah, we got.
Yes. Hello, David.
Say hello.
But
Hello.
and I'll pass the ball quickly, but I just wanted to follow up on what Lev just said, because I've lived in Europe for many decades, and you have seen a steady growth, or you did see before Ukraine, Russian money. I mean, you walk through Knightsbridge in London, and you used to only hear Gulf Arab, speaking Arabic. Increasingly, you started to hear Russian. The largest Russian Orthodox church outside of the former Soviet Union is in Paris. How many inhabitants, how many renters in the various levels of Trump Tower were Russian oligarch money? We thought at the end of the Cold War that it would be our system that would go west. After all, we won the Cold War, right? So it would be democracy, free markets, things of that nature. What really happened, and what I think we have to come to terms with, and many already have, but I think more do, is that instead of our system going west after the end of the Cold War, their corruption came. I'm sorry, instead of our system going east, their corruption came west, and it's endemic. It's absolutely everywhere. So
You still hear those
11's
voices
100% point.
in Mayfair, Knightsbridge, and Chelsea.
I'm
There's still a
sure
lot
you
of Russian
do.
voices
I'm sure
there.
you do.
Oh,
Mary
of course.
Ivana.
I
You can
well,
go get
no,
some good
yo,
pelmeni at Mary Ivana.
Mary Ivana is not even. That's nothing. I mean, you guys got to remember.
Oh,
Look,
I know it's not.
one of the
They're
guys.
terrible.
One. No, I'm just one of the guys that I was actually deal with. Trump sent me to deal with. That was working with was. I don't know if you remember, was Dmitry Firtash. Dmitry Firtash, is one of the most richest, most powerful guy. Controls probably over 30% of all the oil and gas that are dealt with in Eastern Europe. And just so you understand, before he got arrested, he controlled the UK. He owned the parliament. He owned so it's not just properties. It's they infiltrated themselves into the international, and which is more even important, and why we're seeing what we're seeing today into U.S. politics. Over the years, the difference between the Chinese and other foreign assets, what the Russians were a lot smarter when they got to it, is they were able to figure out that Americans were very easily bribed, very wanted it, but they were scared of it. And Russians, there's no better people than the Russians, Eastern Europeans, that know, because their whole culture is worked off of give and take, bribe, quid pro quo, and that type of scenario. So when they started seeing the openness here in the United States, they say, well, listen, you don't have to give me a suitcase like you do in Ukraine or Russia. What you got to do is just pay my lobbyist. And my lobbyist, he knows how to do that, and they'll explain that. And these lobbyists, these high profile lawyers, taught they hired them, and they taught the Russians how to you basically funnel money into here, and how to start controlling our congressmen, our senators, our lobbyists. So when people go out there, and concentrate on AIPAC and the Jewish lobbying system, and they really have no idea who really controls a lot of it, and it is the Russians through even AIPAC and others, because their power, even in Israel. I mean, that's the one thing I talk about. Nobody even understands the relationship that Bibi Netanyahu and Putin have, and how they grew up through the same ranks, as one was growing up in Israel, the other one was growing up in Russia, and how much money in Israel really is, Russian oligarchy, Eastern European money that's, that
Started with the
controls it.
refuseniks.
Exactly. Trump sent me in 2018. If I didn't go in 2018 to help Bibi Netanyahu with the Russian vote, he would not be prime minister right now, because he was on the verge of losing in 2018. And Trump and Giuliani sent me there specifically to help with the Russian vote, because it was so narrow. So there's a lot, it's a different world out there. There's a lot of analysts and pundits that go, say the same thing, and they try to regurgitate what the media talks about. But the real truth is that, there's an organized, coordinated situation going on between Putin, Trump, and other players in their region. Putin's leading the charge. Xi is involved also. That's why you could see, as Trump, just take a look. China, get all the oil you want, no problem. We're best friends. Venezuela, all of a sudden we're partners with Venezuela, selling oil all over the place, sending the money to Qatar. Iran's giving us presents of 10 oil ships. We don't know where that money went to, where that oil ships went to. But if you take a look at all these places, who really controlled them? Who was, if you take a look 6 years ago, 4 years ago, who was in charge of Venezuela? It was the Russians. Remember Igor Sechin, Rosneft, who was behind the, helping Maduro and all that. Same thing. Who is really, involved in these conversations? They say to you it's the Pakistanians when it comes to Iran. It's not. I mean, Pakistan has no influence over Iran. The biggest influence over Iran is the Russians and Putin and the game that he plays. And this is all very coordinated, manipulated. It was like, when they say in nature, when like what's it called? Say a butterfly, comes out of a cocoon, and and things like that. That was a type of like a process that went on over there in the Soviet Union. If that makes sense to you guys.
Nice. Well, this
It
is
does.
great,
It
and we
does.
have
Yeah.
it does, and we have also David with us, and we have Lev with us, and we have Philip Ittner with us, and Jonathan Fink and I, Yuri Rashkin, are the co-hosts. This is really incredible. Just glad to have so many people. And Lev, there's always more questions for you. We have a viewer who would love to hear more about Putin and Netanyahu relationship. If there's
Sure.
anything you
I've
can,
been curious about that one, and this is I've got there's a YouTuber who I follow called Vlad Vexler, and he tries to describe it that if we see Netanyahu and Putin and Trump as being fully aligned or puppets of each other, we're kind of missing the picture. It's
Absolutely.
it's this sort of, you say, it's they're allies in certain respects, and sometimes they may be adversaries, sometimes they're competing in certain areas, and sometimes they see advantage in alignment. I think that because that doesn't really fit so much with 20th century politics, geopolitics so much, which is far more binary. I think we really have a problem in interpreting what's going on. So how does that work? And actually, how close is Putin and Netanyahu? And actually, is that completely the wrong way of looking at it in terms of proximity?
Oh, I think they're very close, even proximity. And I mean, if you take a look at, first of all, I always talk about right now, one of the things I mentioned on my Substack when I talk to everybody, I said, look, the biggest problem we're having right now is you are having when Witkoff and Kushner are sitting down with Putin. You have Steve Witkoff that's not representing the United States; he's representing Putin. You have Jared Kushner that's not representing the United States; he's representing Bibi Netanyahu. So there's really nobody representing the United States there. That's why you're seeing us being the leader of confusion, the craziness that's happening, and we're being there. So you have to go back to the 90s, when the fall of the Soviet Union, at the same time while Putin and the KGB were trying to figure out how to save the KGB, which is now the FSB, to save their inner core, to stay alive and keep moving it. At the same time, Bibi Netanyahu was here in the United States, living on Kushner's couch and going, to colleges here, going through learning American society, graduating here, and building a very, very close relationship with the Kushners. I mean, he literally lived on their couch. Simultaneously, when then Bibi Netanyahu became, I think, first not prime minister, but to the United Nations or something, when he first got whatever his first position was. At the same time, I think Putin was at the time became the mayor of St. Petersburg, and was already in Berezovsky, and all of them were already starting to push him. He was already in that frame where he was going to, start moving up the ranks. As they start moving up the ranks, you have to understand, take it back even further, that going back to the 70s, even in the 70s, when Russia cleared out all their prisons, kind of, it was not clearing out the prison, it was getting rid of all the Jews. And that's when you had a lot of, and that's when we immigrated in 1976. We were going all to Israel. And, I was just fortunate that when we were in Italy, it was the 200th bicentennial of the United States, and I won a green card, and my family was able to go straight to the United States. But a lot of the people that Putin not Putin, the Russians let go in the 70s, immigrated to Israel. And in Israel, a lot of Russians became Israelis. They got circumcised. They went through, processes. I mean, and a lot of that had, money has been flowing into Israel ever since. So that kind of circle between Israel, America, and what's it called, Russia, has always been kind of behind the scenes, being dealt by powerful oligarchs, powerful work, and that's why Epstein. One of the reasons why Epstein is such a major player in a lot of these things, because he was a person that was working closely with the Israelis. At the same time, he was working closely with the Russians. As you can see, it's the same players, same connection, same years going on, and so many years. So when you say what is really the connection there, I mean, the bottom line is, if you take a look at the names of some of the most richest and most powerful people in Israel, you will see their ties go back to the Soviet Union. So
Yeah,
I mean,
it
it's crazy.
started. It started kind of in the 70s with the refuseniks, and then post-Soviet, it was the oligarchs and the Siloviki, and those guys went down and made their ties with Mossad in Israel because of the ease of immigration to there. And then once we got a body politic that had been infiltrated by Russian intelligence in the White House, the ties now between these intelligence organizations, it should be pause for concern for all of us.
And a lot of them, I guess, come from the milieu of the sort of, what do you call it, the voris v zakonie. They come from that sort of semi-tolerated criminal milieu.
Well,
We have one more.
Go ahead.
We have one more guest with us. So I'd like to introduce Christoph Miller, who is joining us, and that's Channel Talk for Ukraine. So that's really awesome. So now we have 6 different channels all in one stream. So share, subscribe, do all the right things. And I just want to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak. David, it's really great to meet you. I don't know that we've ever met. So hello, and continue, please.
No, thank you. I'm awed with the impressive guest list here. I'm very happy to be here. Lev was talking before about the how easy it is for the Russians to influence Americans, and I just wanted to say that I don't have the background a lot of you folks. I'm basically just a schmuck with an attitude, but I grew up in so many places where Russians have control. I grew up in New York, where a big part of the Russian mafia has their claws in Brighton Beach. So I was very familiar with them from an early age. I live in a state now with the Moscow on the Atlantic, otherwise known as Miami. And I live next to another city called St. Petersburg, which actually was founded by a Russian. And I just wanted to say that during Americans aren't the brightest people in the world. And I just want to say that during the 2017 election, the first election that Donald Trump was in, when he darkened our skies, reporters did some very deep digging into what the Russians had done. I think specifically the GRU, how they had infiltrated our social media, and that they started so many fake news sites, so many fake social media sites, how many bots they introduced that were interacting with Americans, and how they were, criticizing and insulting Hillary Clinton and promoting Donald Trump. And after the election was over, some of these reporters interviewed Trump supporters, the ones that had voted for Trump, were strong MAGA, and had interacted with these bots, essentially, with the Russians, and they showed them proof that who they interacted with, who they were talking to, and who convinced them to vote for Trump were Russian agents. And that they were not Americans. They weren't talking to, Joe Smith from Kansas or any other American. These were all Russians, and that they had been convinced, or they had been seduced. They had been lied to. And many of them said, even if they were shown the proof that these were Russians, they said, well, we don't care. We like them anyway. And it's gotten worse since then. That's been almost 10 years ago. And, the Russian control over our social media. In fact, there's been many stories written about LinkedIn, where Jonathan and I actually met originally, about how they had their claws into LinkedIn. And the American people are so gullible. They don't care. To be honest with you, I'm not quite sure why MAGA is so enraptured with the Kremlin, except, and I've actually written about this and spoken about it a lot, I think many of the values that Putin professes, doesn't believe in, but professes, meaning the wholesome Russians, the religious Russians, really do believe, that they are our brothers. The American Orthodox, which the evangelicals are, really do kind of understand, or at least they identify, they believe with the Russian Orthodox. They believe that America and Russia should be closer together. And what Trump says about Putin, that he's a strong leader, they believe we should have a strong leader. Many of them believe in dictators. It's frightening. I never thought growing up that so many Americans could be lied to and convinced so easily to go over to the Russian point of view, the Ruski Mir, but they are. And it saddens me. It nauseates me, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you made some really good points, David. And by the way, I also look who we have here, Big J,
Yeah,
in the
one
house.
one
that's good to
quick
see you.
Jason.
hey Jason,
Oh,
one
there's so many
quick
people.
point about that, by the way. If the evangelicals and the kind of hardcore, brimstone and fire evangelical and Protestants knew how much the Russian Orthodox Church hates them deeply and demonizes them, they might change their opinion. Because
Yeah, but they don't want to read that stuff. They're very
of course they
aversive
don't.
to
Of course they
facts.
don't.
I
Of
mean,
course
don't
they don't.
muddy the
No.
waters with reality.
Why bother?
All
with
right.
the truth?
The one thing I just want to touch on what David said quickly about why I wouldn't say Americans are naive. I'll just say to you this: Russians are strategic in how they manipulate and how they could get their point across. Also, the one thing that the Russians are very well at doing is finding weak spots in people, and most people have weak spots when it comes to power and money, and a lot of the influencers that you're seeing push the reason why a lot of Americans are so pro-Russia is because Russia was able to use not only social media with the bots, which you're 100% right. They had whole bot farms. Jason could probably talk even much better about that. But they also were able to infiltrate and buy people like Tim Fool, right-wing, agencies here that were manipulating and pushing Russian propaganda, Russian information. They literally paid for it. Simultaneously, same thing they did in Congress. Like if you take a look at how the money flows went, and in the beginning, who was funding a lot of like Marjorie Taylor Greene's and the talking points and the stuff was going, it was also linked to a lot of Russian, interference. So, and when you as an American that lives in the Midwest, that does not travel to all over the world, and doesn't get the same experience, understanding of how the world works, we're taught, as Americans, to listen to our Congress people, to our president, to our senators, to people of power, that we think we live in a place where they can't come out and just lie to us, and that's what we saw happen. What you saw happen in the first administration that is continuously going on now is you have people, powerful people like Lindsey Graham, senators, Congress people, Fox News, television personalities going out there and lying to the public, pushing Russian propaganda. So, just think about how they pushed the lies about the Bidens, which I'm the one that brought the lies. So I know their lies. I know how we were pushing them. And I'm just saying to you, and it's easy then to influence because most people don't sit there on TV and watch 20, go on these, shows and get so much involved. Most people are out there trying to make a living, trying to pay their bills, trying to pay the rent, and they come home, they watch a news cycle for 5-10 minutes, and if you see breaking news, Zelensky stole $50 million from what's it called, and we're not giving money to you. I mean, a negative atmosphere towards Ukraine. If you see it day in, day out, it becomes that cult mentality where they brainwash you to believing it's true.
Well,
So
Lev,
that's
you're
why a
right.
lot
And
of
the thing is, in America, the far right and the pro-Russian forces control a great deal of our social media. Fox News is a great example. And you're right. The average American, and I just wrote about this, doesn't have time or the interest in worrying about geopolitics or what's going on between Russia and Putin and Xi and Trump and blah, blah, blah. They're worried about putting food on their table, keeping a roof over their head, paying for the cost of food, which is astronomical. So they don't really care about that. And they listen to Fox News, a lot of them. That's all they listen to. And like I said, social media, for the most part, is right wing. The centrists and the Democrats are not very good at messaging. They're just not. I hope they learn very quickly, but they don't get the message out. And that's what the middle America is listening to, the far right, and oftentimes the Kremlin's message.
Then
I worked
turn
for Fox.
to,
I worked for
Jason.
Fox News. I worked for Fox
excellent.
News. I worked for Fox News for 10 years as their London chief producer. And I tried to get on Russian stories anytime I possibly could. And it was just crickets, especially after Trump came into power. You didn't even want to say the word Russia because of the fear that it would then circle back to
Well,
the
you know what? I
Russiagate
watched. I will
controversy.
say it. I watched Fox News last night because I don't know what a crazy thing.
Greatest
And
day
it
when
felt-
I
it
got
felt
fired. When
like-
I got fired, one
it
of my
felt
favorite
like
days.
I was in Donald Trump's waiting room because it was just a bunch of people who were auditioning to be in his administration. You never know; it could be the next Secretary of Defense. So I think it's just crazy town over there. It's really not for us. It's just all for Trump. But I would love to welcome Jason
I
J.
have to
Smart
say about,
here.
oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Jason, yeah.
Quickly about
Thank you,
Fox
Grace.
News, and I'll
Good to see you.
sign off. When I redeployed from Iraq, I for whatever reason got into the Fox crowd. I was on Fox News 2 to 3 times a day, 5 or 6 days a week for about 3 or 4 years, until a call came in from the White House and said, get rid of him, because I started criticizing Bush. Other than that, I was their boy. So I'm embarrassed to say it now, but I lived in Fox News in New York. I was in their studios. So
Wow.
such is the changing times.
So I want to reframe this as a question for Jason and Lev. And is one of the advantages that Russia has here is that many, many people, that includes many of the media, many of the public, which Lev was just talking about, and David as well, still live in a world of values, or like to think they live in a world of values where things are real. They refer to real policies. They refer to things that are actually shaped by a certain political morality and sometimes religious morality. Whereas those who are managing much of this news, and especially the Russians who are very transactional, they no longer live in this kind of world. There is no connection to morality, limitations, or anything. It's just all manipulation, revenue streams, and pushing certain transactional interests. Let's get Lev first, and then Jason.
I'm sorry, I you were breaking up a little bit here. My fault. So I didn't
All right.
hear the. I heard
Then
you
maybe
saying something.
maybe Jason could go first.
Yeah, Jason, you go first, and then we'll repeat the question.
I also missed what you
apologize.
said. Sorry.
I don't know. Yeah, right. I apologize. Something.
Oh, that's
you were
okay.
talking, you just
Something
cut
went
off.
off. We're just saying that one of the problems is many in the public and even the media still exist in a world of real values, whereas the actual media itself, or the manipulative media like Tenet, Russian transactionalism, they're already completely cut off from any value. They're just after a particular transactional outcome.
You want to go
Yes.
first, Chase? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
No, I mean, I would just say that I think that
He
inherently
just said
media
yes.
is transactional. No, it is. Well, I mean, ultimately, if you look at it, they have shareholders, generally speaking, to whom they have to respond. So you have to derive a profit of some sort. I remember talking to somebody for a major American newspaper, well known, not right leaning, by the way, who immediately before the election, I said, it doesn't look like many people are excited in Ukraine world about Trump about to win. And he said, I don't know. A lot of people here at the newspaper are happy. I said, really? Why so? And he said, it's always going to be news. We'll be selling a lot more copy than we used to. So, I mean, it depends. I think that there's a motive to amplify things that aren't necessarily real, to go track down things that are sort of missing the central point. And the reason is because it'll be a good story that gets lots of print. But I don't think that's just common, I think, to a lot of industries. Unfortunately, now that things have moved more to a social media, it's probably more so that way than even before. Probably much more so than it was before. But overall, it doesn't help to get to the essence of what's occurring. I think actually what's missing in a lot of things, in the case of the Ukraine debate, is where we often see this, is they can pull out something that is perhaps true, but it misses the whole point, the larger picture of what is occurring. And I think when we talk about Russia, we see that quite a bit. As you guys were discussing, people have this, I think, very diluted view or incorrect view of what is occurring in Russia is somehow that it's promoting a certain type of conservatism. It's simply not the case. I mean, if you pull out a couple of specific cherry-picked examples, maybe you can come to that conclusion. But if you look on the whole and have an actual understanding of what is occurring there, it couldn't be further from the truth.
I mean, I would agree with everything Jason said. It's definitely, especially when you come to media, and especially it's hard to say far right and left now, because it's all, what we're seeing, soon Ellison might be taking over CNN you know. So there's definitely a major media push right now, and like Jason said, also, I mean, the media loves it because there's, one of the things you see with Donald Trump, and that's why all of these platforms like Substack and YouTube and all of them are growing, because you have all these independent journalists out there, because you have, the media cycle is just like, think about it. Today you wake up, all of a sudden, and within 5 minutes the markets are down, they went up, people are losing billions of dollars, stock manipulation happening, the Strait of Hormuz is open, Strait of Hormuz is closed, Lebanon is ceasefire started, Lebanon saying it's not. I mean, it's just nonstop, and that's what Donald Trump does. That's part of what was our game plan going back to 2015, is to flood the media, to flood it to such a degree where people, either get tired of listening to it and move on, B, are brainwashed. If I point to something that's white and I tell you for over a period of years it's black, eventually either you're just going to start agreeing with me, or your brain is going to start thinking it, because it's just the way our brains are, to work. And I think over the years, we're seeing a major shift now happening, where a lot of the media, doesn't really, I think it was always like that, but before, at least, we had certain news sources that really cared about news. Now, I think everybody's chasing that breaking news title to get clicks, to get people, that doesn't really talk about the real story. And that's why I think Trump and Brad Pascal and others in his orbit back even in 2015, 16 realized. And that's why Trump's a master of manipulating the media. And that's why one of the reasons why I talk to people, I'm here in Washington, D.C. right now. Later on today, I'm meeting with several Congress people. And I tell them all the time, I said, you guys have to stop being reactive. You have to be, attackable. Like, you can't wake up every morning and think about, what did Donald Trump put out today? And everybody's running around trying to respond to the craziness he's doing. You got to come out there and say, how are you going to fix the problems? Do it. Let Donald Trump respond to your craziness and fix the world. So there's it's those type of even little things that, we need to start moving, because right now, Trump, and with the control, with his relationships with the Russians and what's going on with all of, the hornet's nest he kicked over in the Middle East, it's just a nonstop of just, false information.
I can tell you this for sure. When I used to work for CBS News, those of us who are out here actually gathering news took our jobs very seriously. And the vast majority of us saw it as a responsibility, and we took it, as a vocation that, we on the ground took very seriously. Our management was a problem because they had to answer to corporate interests. And increasingly, it was obvious to me that it was more about money and profit than it was about news gathering. And now to see Barry Weiss in charge of CBS, CBS, an institution that I'm not kidding, I truly loved working for CBS. It was the house that Murrow built. And we took that seriously. We took the Tiffany network very seriously, and the reputation and the responsibility that we had. And it is diminished now to the point, and Fox was a huge part of it. And as I say, one of the best days of my life was when I got fired from Fox. It was a wonderful, wonderful event. I didn't realize it because I was afraid of losing a paycheck. But the next morning I woke up like a 10-ton weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It has increasingly become about profit, and Fox makes a lot of money. Now there's also political aspect.
Individual integrity versus brand integrity. And
unfortunately, there's less and less room. There's less and less room in the industry for those kind of people. And more, it's about circling the wagons and making sure that you get clicks and, that you get advertising space and things like that. Again, it's about profit, not about news. And that's when I kind of knew I was on the way out of the business.
Hi, everybody. Shall I say something from Germany?
I would love it.
Chuck some questions in. Well, we've got Lev
and Jason.
Let's try.
I was just gonna say, because I have a 12 o'clock interview right now. I have to get ready for. So I have like maybe 2-3 minutes left.
Fantastic. Let's get a question over to you while we've still got you here.
Yeah, to Lev. Okay.
Who's going to be it? Who's going to jump in with the question? Any takers?
Lev, just
Go
tell us, whatever you got to share with us. So we'll give you the last closing word. You got a political speech to practice. Go ahead.
I have a question to Lev.
Yes.
Knowing somebody like Trump so well and being in America, and that's also for the rest of you. I ask myself this all the time. Has anybody heard of this term, gray rhinoceros, gray rhino? Something of you? It's
Gray Rhino. No,
gray
I
rhino.
haven't.
It's an image I heard recently for a horrible event which is coming, and everybody is seeing it, and nobody can do anything against it. And me as a German, I saw Trump is coming again. What's going on here? Let's stay away from that. And so what can we do about it? We as Germans or as Europeans, we just can try to get away and make our own stuff here. But how are you feeling in America, having a guy like Donald Trump there, making the greatest mess ever? Yeah.
Well,
What do you think about Europe?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a great question. That's one of the things we always speak. I mean, me and Jay spoke about on our show several times. Look, Trump has a, what's the right word? He has a chip on the shoulder when it comes to Europe. Just like when it comes to Ukraine and others. Trump was never, like I said earlier, never looked up to as a world financial billionaire or whatever you want to call him. He was never invited to Davos. He was never part of the world clique of oligarchy. Donald Trump was a New York guy. That's where they knew him until he went on to The Apprentice, and then he became like a showman here. So when you talk about people and how they, what really, why they follow him, I think, is that the question? I just want to make sure I answer your question properly. You're saying, what do the Germans do or the Europeans?
Well, I
should
was
they
going
do?
to tweet that question. Are we on our own? I mean,
Oh yeah,
there's what you guys do, and
Yeah,
then
but
there's
I
what
don't
we
know.
have to do. Do we have to just assume we're on our own and get on with it?
Well, it's a combination. Yeah, first of all, Trump has no idea of geopolitical. He's not a guy that knows anything about the international. Like I said, when we were first speaking in our first meeting, he didn't even know Ukrainians were separate from Russians and where Ukraine was and stuff like that. He doesn't listen to his actual military, which they've already purged, State Department and people inside. So he has a lot of yes men, and most of these yes men are also people that have their own interests involved, like the Witkoffs and the Kushners of the world. That, like I said, Kushner and his alliance to Bibi Netanyahu, Witkoff, has his own, personal involvement with Russian oligarchy, Russian criminal aspect, going back to the 90s, early 2000s. And right now, what you're watching play out is a combination of Trump's hatred towards certain countries, and then his manipulation by people like Dmitriev, through people like Witkoff and others, to paint a picture to him, like a rosier picture, that Russia is strong and they're going to win, and they're going to do this, and get rid of the NATO alliances. Even the fact that with this war, what happened in Israel, some of the things that I've been hearing inside the inner circles of Trump is Trump couldn't even understand how NATO really works, and he thought, well, I'm going to go attack Iran. I'm just going to have NATO come in there. And he doesn't even know what Article 5 really means, that, it's not a choice of war. It's a choice where if you're being attacked. And the reason why he's being put in these positions, because the biggest, the person that really benefits from this more than anybody is Vladimir Putin. From the destruction of NATO, from the destruction to making sure all this Iran fight's going on, because right now, as I'm hearing, there's more conversation
Does it
about.
mean that it's his plan, or is he just the beneficiary, or is it his plan?
He's a beneficiary. The plan is always Putin. Putin's the mastermind behind this. He's the beneficiary because he's being given, these golden items, like, oh, we'll give you this oil contract, or we'll partner up with this, because you have to understand, in broad daylight, once this all of a sudden, between Jared Kushner, Don Jr., Eric, Trump, and their little leader Stephen Witkoff, who's what's his name, Witkoff's son, is Zach Witkoff. I'm sorry, Steve Witkoff's son, Zach Witkoff. I mean, they are taking billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars in that, from oil deals to military deals. I mean, right now you got the Trump kids that are now building 10,000 drones a day. Does that look like that's a war that's about to end if the family's getting into? So there's a lot of things, and I know Jay could talk to a lot more of this stuff to you, because there's nobody that knows internally inside of Russia what's going on better than Jason Smart. So, I'll pass it off a little bit to him to follow up on that.
Yeah,
Good to see you, Lev. Good to see you, Lev. Always a pleasure.
Nice to meet
I'll
you.
say hi to Sasha for you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys for having me. And Jay, I'll give you a call actually later, because if you have time, Tuesday we have a big special with Ken Hardbar. Let's see if you want to join.
Ken, love to. Look forward to it, buddy.
Yeah.
Good to talk to you.
I'll send you information. Guys, thank you for having me.
Great to meet you,
Everybody
Lev.
go, if you can, donate
Yeah.
to Ukraine, help out. Ukraine needs all the help we need. So support. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Well,
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Yuri,
so,
you
can
take
you
the
hear me
reins
better
for a
now?
bit and fire
Or is
some
it-
questions at Jason. I'm gonna
Hello?
take a few minutes out.
you
So
hear me?
I'll be back in a few minutes.
Christoph, I just need you to turn up your microphone.
So
And
nobody's reacting. The audio's not working here. Too bad.
No, I think you need to work on the tech there, because we can't really hear you.
What's going on here?
Let's
All
get a
right.
question over to Jason while Christoph is trying to fix his setup.
Jason, I would love to hear a little more expanded of your views on the media environment and on the media coverage, because it is a topic that really we don't talk about a lot because there's so much news to cover. But who covers the news but media? And you are interacting with it both as kind of an independent journalist and also interacting with different media organizations. What is your experience with that?
Well, I think it would depend on the topic matter. But in general, I agree with what Philip said. Is I don't think it's the journalists that are generally the problem. It's the corporate interests that are associated with it. The fact is, at the end of the day, it's selling a product. And so there's an interest to make sure that you get out a product that will get as much attention as possible. There was a book that came out probably 20 years ago. God, more than that probably. And it was analyzing actually how the media had shifted the United States since the 1980s. And it was looking at the increase of rage being behind stories. Everything's outrageous. Everything's just atrocious. And it has to always have a sentiment to that. And it does actually correlate very well to how much media was then able to make profit from it. So if you don't have a story that has staying power, there's an emotional staying power to it, it's not going to be able to generate revenue as well for the channel in the long term. So you have to routinely find something to be outrageous. And I mean, this is a stupid example about 20 years ago, but you might recall there was a mini scandal in the US with Barack Obama wearing a tan suit or not wearing a flag pin and these sorts of absurd little trinkets, complete non-issues in the global scheme of what's occurring. But why would that be a top news story? I mean, in what planet is that really of any value or significance? It's not, but you have to find something. And so it's this quest to find something that will check off the box for a day to be a story. And then the fact that that became a story of a story that people said that, but this isn't really rage, brought more attention back to the newspaper and got more clicks. So it all works actually to one's benefit if you're trying to figure out how to make your channel get more attention. So unfortunately, I think that a lot of the news today is driven by that. Now, in the case of Ukraine, or in the case of any sort of story like Ukraine, I think in Ukraine, though I could speak to more knowledgeably, we see that there's a decrease of stories about things like the attacks that happened. Like last night in Kyiv was a significant attack, as you all saw. The city was covered in black smoke, and that was because of what was going on. Now, is there still an interest in that, though? Is there still high demand? Do people still click it, or has that already reached the point of critical mass where no longer are people shocked by it or offended by it? They just think that's what happens in Ukraine, and they don't really give more value to it. And so finding the unique angles is another aspect. But that goes back to journalism. But at the point of corporate side, I think the corporate side would say, well, it's just Ukraine's not an issue anymore. It's not a top issue anymore. It's not something that people care about anymore. It gets pushed to the side. And that's why I think it is quite strategically wise to click articles on Ukraine and read them. But in general, to express through what you're doing publicly that Ukraine does matter, because if there is a demand in the marketplace, even those who might not really care one way or another, they'll be forced to see it more often, which gives a perception that it's a larger issue. Even if you see it passively, when you're flipping through the headlines, you see it's continually an ongoing issue, and that's positive. That's not completely dismissed or lost, as is often the case with important stories. But for Kiev or for Ukraine today, unfortunately, it is it is sort of surprising how much of the news it does get changed or manipulated by the fact that the president chooses to tweet something that completely distracts from what the debate's actually about. I look in the case of negotiations. We've seen that Ukraine is obviously entering them in good faith. Ukraine has done everything it can to show that it's interested in debate, ending this war. It sends truly a A-level team to all the negotiations. Russia, on the other hand, sends propagandists like Medinsky. It sends people that are not serious, that are not well known. They're not diplomats. They're not people who can effectively make any decisions. But it's really picked up. The president acts like there's serious discussions going on, and he's doing his best to empower them. But the fact is, nothing's going to come to them. I mean, even the people the Russians send. I'm sorry, it's getting onto a side note, but if you look at who the Russian debate team, I keep saying debate team, the negotiation team, if you keep looking who they send, they're sending people who not only lack authority to make any decisions, they're sending people who are typically born in Ukraine, who are Russian citizens, so that the Russians can essentially tell the Ukrainians and show the Ukrainians that they're not taking it seriously, saying, look, here's Ukrainians who agree with us. And it's a joke. They're making a farce of the entire thing. But unfortunately, people in the White House don't appreciate the joke. They don't appreciate why the Russians are doing this is to make a farce of the entire episode. And does the public, though, even if that's a story, which I think would be a noteworthy story, to show that they're completely uninterested in trying to end the war, they're not doing what is necessary, the prerequisites, would people in the press or would the public read those articles if they came out? Would they have the comprehension necessary to understand why this is such an obvious sign from the Russians of total disrespect and disregard for the negotiation process? Probably not. But either way, we have to do what we can to continue expounding upon the point that Ukraine does matter from a multitude of different sides, and not just limited to, and I think this was probably truer towards the beginning of the war, where a lot of people are very focused on just why this is a tragedy for Ukraine, which I think misses, once again, the larger story. It is a tragedy for Ukraine, but it's something that will have significant effects for American citizens and Europeans and everybody else if this continues, and why it needs to be stopped, and why backing Ukraine is about so much more than just the one missile strike yesterday in Kiev or one of the other attacks. This is something much greater. This is something that has profound global effects, which we'll be feeling for generations into the future if Russia were to win.
And the press corps is woefully underrepresented here. It is expensive to do foreign news coverage, especially if you're in television or another broadcast, so primarily television. But I mean, like CNN does not have a permanent presence here. None of the big American networks have a permanent presence here. They will, occasionally they will fly in a team for 10 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. Then they get back on their plane and they fly back to London or New York or whatever, wherever. I'm speaking mainly about the English language press corps. Very few people have a permanent presence here. And there's so many problems with that, aside from the fact that you're not hearing from people on the ground here, but those journalists are not getting the depth of what is happening here, because you can't just fly in for a few weeks and fly out. Whereas there are legacy offices, say in Moscow, so you will hear Russian war stories, but from that side of the equation. So one of the things that's been most disturbing for me as a former, professional, whatever you want to call it, mainstream media, television guy, is the fact that they're not here. They're just simply not here. It falls to podcasters, and print can be done on a relatively cheap budget, so there are print guys here. But our press corps has done in my professional opinion, a really poor job of covering this story.
Well, Philip, let me just follow up on that if I can. I believe you're absolutely correct. Look, Jason's made some excellent points about the American media, specifically talking about that. The hollowing out of the American media, mainstream media, by the corporate heads that own the media, it's been devastating. Just what you're talking about. The fact that they don't have people in foreign nations and foreign capitals anymore, nowhere near what they used to. Investigative reporting in America is almost like ancient history. I can say this for a fact. I've been trying to get some stories looked into, investigated some serious national security issues, and they just don't have the people. It's not that they don't have the interest, although many of them don't. They just don't have the people. And with social media, with what Jason was saying, that corporate media just wants clicks, which is just, I'm sorry, that's what it's become. They decided, well, we just want to enrage people, if we just want to get people upset, which is what's bringing in our audience, then what do we need foreign offices for, or foreign correspondents? What do we need investigative reporters for? Why do we need a lot of journalists anyway? Let's have bots do this. Let's have AI do this. And let's just give them the stories that they want, maybe secondhand and not personally. And let's not do any investigative stories because they're not going to read them anyway. And you get what we've got now in America, which is a lot of AI generated slop, very little or not enough foreign reporting in person, and an incurious American public. It's always been that way, but now that's what the corporate media is giving them, a lot of incurious information that they think they want, because now they don't have the staff. And I'm sorry, in my opinion, it's getting worse. It's been left to podcasters to try to pick up the reins here, and hopefully we are doing what we can.
But it's interesting with the media. I've contemplated a lot on Ukraine, specifically what's going on, and it's sort of funny is that there's several different things happening at the same time, and they're not directly related, but they're interrelated. So on one side, we have, as was observed, there's reporters in places like Moscow. The BBC has a person in Moscow, for instance, who does a really good job considering the restraints he has. But the problem is he's never going to cover the fact that the government in Russia is engaged in a legal war and using direct terms. He's never going to have interviews with people where they will be able to show their face saying that the government is actively working against the population, or that the FSB is conspiring to take over major industries and they gain from this war, or that people in the FSB gain from more Russian soldiers being killed, or that there's certain elite groups in Russia within the clans of Moscow who would like to see the war continue, even if that means Russia's defeat, because ultimately they believe that's in their economic interest. Because if you're printing something like that, you would not be in Russia the next day as a journalist. So the fact is, there's one side where they can't put out what would actually be really great news coverage from Russia. And the fact is that I don't think many journalists get visas anymore to be in Russia. But on the Ukraine side, I think the downside that we do have a lot of print journalists still. New York Times has people. Washington Post closed their office. They still have one of their people, though, who's been there for years and years. We do have some other print there. BBC left. And you're right, there's not much TV that I could think of anymore. Japanese TV was there for a long time. But beside that, when you look at who is left, the downside is because we have a lot of print journalists and a lot of people who are independent that are there still. And Ukraine's very liberal. It's not hard to get a visa to be a journalist. We have a lot of negative stories. I mean, every time there's something to recover that's not a positive, it will definitely get coverage. I mean, definitely it'll get coverage because it is newsworthy. But the fact is, it's because everyone's always trying to find an angle on something that'll be a story that's unique copy. And so I think it gives the perception that things are worse inside of Ukraine than they are. The fact is, they're actually a lot better. It's just there's a greater microscope on Kiev than there is on Moscow. Now, within Moscow itself, if you look at the last couple of days, there's been the Moscow Economic Forum, which was, truthfully, I mean, sincerely, like it's worth checking out if you haven't seen what's going on over there. Putin spoke at it, and yet what they're saying is how dire the situation is. The wheels are truly coming off the bus. It is amazing to hear the most famous economists in their country, one after another, saying the country might not have the risk of going into recession, but it's already probably been in full recession for half a year, but the government doesn't give us accurate numbers, so none of us can really know. And the president's probably making the wrong decisions because everybody lies to him about what's actually happening. The head of the central bank earlier today said, isn't it amazing how everybody's blaming us, the central bank, for having high interest rates due to inflation? And they're saying that's the reason that right now we have economic problems. Well, how is it possible that all of them in December reported to the president that everything's fine? Why has everything changed in 4 months? Or is it fact? It's not the interest rates. It's that the economy is cratering, and we all know that, and none of us are taking action to stop it. But you don't see that anywhere in the press. Now, fortunately, I read Russian. So I'm watching the Russian press. I'm reading the Russian news. And I'm like, I can't believe this. This is incredible what's going on over there. This is huge news. This is totally worth covering. But does it get covered? It does not get covered. But if Ukraine, anytime something happens, I mean, the most minor of scandals, it'll get covered. And I get it. And I'm not against transparency. I'm totally fine with that being covered. But I think that it puts too much of an accent on what being a non-issue versus what is something that actually could cause the collapse of the Russian government. Collapse of the Russian government, minor scandal, some deputy minister somewhere, and the deputy minister story in Ukraine will get the attention in the press in the West, and the fact that the Russian economy is imploding gets no attention whatsoever. So it's not necessarily a conspiracy by corporate elites. Now the corporate elites at the end, they're also in a difficult situation. Newspapers in America are going extinct. For that matter, TV news is actually, Philip, talking to you at Christmas time, I never thought about TV news as well, but it seems it's going that way too. I always thought it was just print. I never occurred to me. But yes, obviously print and TV are struggling. And so you're looking for a competitive advantage. And what is it that will make you the dominant news story? And that is going to put you in a position where you're probably going to be more on edge than you would like to be. You're probably going to be forced to take more stories that are B-rate, but still it's a story, because in the end it is something that's going to generate a lot of discussion or attention. And that's what the corporate executives are looking for. And again, I don't say that's a journalist's fault. At the end, they have to do what their bosses want them to do. But at the end of the day, it is something that is changing the dynamic of how news works. And that is something that we have to take into account when we're trying to think of what's next or what we're doing strategically. It does surprise me how often, I mean, frankly, that doesn't shock me, but does surprise me, is how often I will read newspaper articles that are quoting Twitter, which is such cheap journalism I don't have words for it. But either way, when you look at that, it does also show us something else. It gives us a huge advantage because, and I get quoted, my Twitter gets quoted a lot. And that's why I could say I'm surprised that qualifies to be a quote. But when you think about it, if that's true, then we have the ability to get out things that would not necessarily get other widespread attention otherwise. We could take advantage of the fact that by putting out things that are unique, sides of the story that are not getting attention, we could perhaps hope to get Ukraine into the large-scale news or the wider news world by putting out stuff that is not otherwise covered.
So, Jason, you have been talking of American newspapers now, or of what? What kind of newspaper?
I was talking about American news is the one I know best, but
yeah. Because I think the same way here from Germany, and I also would like to ask Jonathan, as an Englishman, how is the coverage of the situation in England? And me as a German, I can just say totally agree to what Jason said. The strategic covering is zero something. They when we listen to the outcome of Ukrainian successes and how they beat the Russian army all the time and how they become more and more successful, I miss this here in Germany. This is not really covered. The Germans are known for being very careful. Kaufmännische. Yeah, they are prudent. They try to always see the pessimistic side. And I think this is really bad because we have to make a strategic decision in our journalism and talk more about the Ukrainian successes, talk only about the Ukrainian successes, and tell that the Russian Empire is really but it's to be beaten. We have here still this narrative. They cannot be beaten. They are so big. So much Russian narrative in our discussion here. I really hate this, and that's why we are all talking here on the channel. And I'm very happy that me as a German I can also participate here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think one of the most, at least in my eyes, and this is just my own very subjective view, but I think one of the most powerful things, and I try it on my YouTube, I do this more. In my written articles, I do this a lot more, is if you look at the data is pretty clear what's going on. And so it's not something subjective. It's not because I want Ukraine to win. look at the data points. Since January, Russia, month after month, is taking about half the amount of territory that it was before. At this, at this point, it's going to take this month, it's going to be less than 50 square kilometers. It's a very small territory. The cost of how much lives that cost for the Russians is 556% increase since January per square kilometer. 556%. The amount of equipment it takes is 7.1 to 9.1 times more than what it was just 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago. So when you look at it, you say that's a huge increase. How does the government deal with that? Well, they can't, because if you look at the data of what they're able to produce, they're not able to produce enough. And if you look at the economic data, this is going to get very complicated fast. The fascinating part is for Russia to continue financing this war, they're taking out huge loans. They have a budget deficit already. Their total annual deficit, they blew through it in the course of the first 3 months of the year. At this point, they're 11% above that, 11.3% above that, as I recall. What's incredible? They're taking loans from the major banks in Russia to pay for the war. The problem with that is if you take out, let's say, $1 billion from a bank, I'm just making a number, and you go out and buy tanks with that. That works because the bank says, well, you'll pay us back with interest and we'll make a ton of money on this. The problem is they have no ability to pay back the banks. Already, the banks have a lack of liquidity. This is leading to something that could become the cascading collapse of banks within Russia. Because think about it. If you make a tank and you send it off to war in Ukraine and it gets destroyed, that's not like you bought a car to go, for work purposes. When you finish using it, you sell it to somebody else and make cash back, and then he delivers pizza with the car, and then that contributes to the economy. No, a tank goes to Ukraine, it gets destroyed. That means all that money, the millions of dollars, just went up in smoke and it's gone forever. Russia will not be able to pay back. And when the banks start collapsing, then you'll start to see regime change. The situation in Russia is incredibly complex. It's getting worse by the day. And if people just understood the numbers, they'd see why Ukraine is not a question if it can win. It will win. We just have to increase the pressure at this point on Russia.
We are talking about the collapse of Russia now, Jason, and all the others. The greatest fear of the Germans or German government seems to be collapse of Russia is a very bad thing. With Vladimir Putin, we know what we have. It's bad, but we know what it have. After Putin, it can become worse, and the collapse of Russia would be the worst thing of all. That's this funny story is in the heads of many Germans and also in the governments. I think
the same thing in the United States,
and that's why.
I'm afraid it's the same thing here too. Philip, are you about to announce your
I'm sorry. Yes, I do have to bounce out. But as far as European or Western concerns about,
I cannot hear you.
No,
I hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. I think Christoph, you've got some issues there.
I think the West is going to have to realize that a post-Ukraine war, Russia will be different no matter what, as will Ukraine, and most likely, more likely than not, a post-Ukraine war will not include Putin. That is debatable, but that's my personal opinion. But Jason, I want to point to something that you had said earlier, in that the cost is unsustainable for Russia. Because I have been out to the east, and I suspect so have you. They haven't even gotten to the hard part yet. That they fight for months over little towns like Chasiv Yar and Pokrovsk, and they lose tens of thousands of men and billions of dollars of infrastructure, and they haven't even gotten to the fortress cities yet. And let's say in a worst case scenario, they are successful in punching through those fortress cities, which are these industrialized cities in the east of the country, for those who don't know. Even if they were able to, at great expenditure, break through and, open up into some of the more defenses that lie now and are being built, all the time by Ukraine, leading up into even larger cities, that's an even larger loss that they're going to take. They do not have it within their means to take the strategic objectives that they need to take. Aside from the other reasons they started this war, they must change the government in Kiev to one that is more friendly to Moscow, and they must take Odessa so that they can regain control of the western bank of the Black Sea, because that's their ability to exert naval power. And so much of this has been about that. And they just can't do it. I have seen the defenses. I have covered over a dozen wars and conflicts. Unless they have some ace up their sleeve or some, massive influx of money, which the lifting of sanctions as it is now because of the crisis in the Gulf is not going to do, and it's also not going to come online in time. The Russians are going to lose this war. I am very, very, loss is a difficult term to define perhaps, but they will not be successful in getting the strategic aims that they started this war with. And ergo, I think the world should prepare for a post-Putin Russia. I think the world should start preparing for a Russia that has lost its identity as empire and will have to finally look in the mirror and decide what it is if it isn't an empire. So Jason is absolutely right. This is a hugely strategically important war. I wish there were more coverage of it that was done with, proper intent so that we can inform our populace and let them actually know what's going on here. And the last thing I'll say before I leave is, Jason, we still need to get you in the studio sometime. And
Sounds
Jonathan, good. Both Jonathan and Yuri, thank you so much for co-hosting this. Jonathan, thank you for setting it up. It's always a pleasure. I will always be at your disposal should you need me. And please, please, please do donate to Ukraine through the links that have been provided throughout. It is important for all the reasons that I just outlined, and it's just the right thing to do. So thank you all for letting me run on at the mouth at times, but I do appreciate your thoughts and being able and having the privilege to contribute to this conversation. So thank you once again to everybody.
Great to see you, Philip.
Massive pleasure. Great to see you.
Nice to meet you, Philip. It's great. One of the things, if you're dealing with YouTubers, you're going to have people who know how to stalk for a while. So that's pretty, reliable. We can predict that, but that's great because we have 4 hours to fill today, huh? Jason, I have a question for you.
It's absolutely
right, Patri. Look, Jason, what do you think will happen to Russia once it collapses? How many countries will Russia break into? I think that's a really kind of a, because we discussed how in all the countries, people are being warned, like, God forbid Russia breaks up, it's going to be worse. But let's talk about good things. What if it breaks up? Then what could be the wonder? Why is this better?
It depends on how it collapses and what we mean by collapse. There's a few different scenarios. So I think that it all depends on that. So let's imagine, though, the primary scenario, which is that, which seems probably I think the most probable is, and I've said since probably a month after the war started, how this is likely to end the war is that there will be a significant financial event within Russia that causes a significant political event, which thereafter leads to a change of power. So if that were to happen, historically, the most dangerous period of time after you take power, you usurp power or seize power, is the period immediately thereafter. It's called the post-revolutionary phase, because it's during that period that other people say, but who died and made you the king? Why is it that you get to decide everything that's going on? I'm not in favor of that. I didn't vote for you. Or more realistically, in the case of Russia, other clans would wish to take power themselves, and they're not going to be satisfied by that. So, which is a good thing for Ukraine, because that means that something like a war in Ukraine that's far away is not going to be your priority. Your priority is going to be putting your resources into preserving your power. The means by which you preserve your power is by having troops in Moscow, not having troops in Ukraine. No matter what, Ukraine ultimately becomes a very tertiary issue, because your first and foremost priority has to be protecting yourself. Now, undoubtedly, whoever takes power is going to have to liquidate some of the other clans to prevent having future run-ins, future challenges for their power. And that's when things get really interesting. But other way, what's a very important fact to note is that, look at Siberia as an example. I just saw the comment. Siberia is an interesting question. Siberia, we have to understand a few different things. Is that first and foremost, there are private military companies in Russia which are quite large. Some of them are owned by things like Gazprom. Those private military companies are there for only one reason, which is to protect oligarchical interest and the assets that they have should anybody try to seize those assets. So that's really important. But the other thing that's really important to notice is areas that would be most ripe for succession movements, such as Chechnya. Chechnya has got a different sort of situation, though. Kadyrov, the amount of troops he's built up over the past 2 years is pretty incredible. I want to say the number of Chechen troops has doubled. But more incredible than that, look at the mortality rate or the fatality rate for the Chechen troops versus others. It's the lowest in the country next to Moscow during the course of war in Ukraine. Now, why is that? It's because they're choosing to keep them alive, to not send them to war. We call them TikTok soldiers. But the reason for that is not that they don't want to die in the war, but also because Kadyrov understands that he must preserve the forces he has to make sure that he can preserve his own power, no matter what happens in Chechnya, but also so they have people there for any sort of unrest that builds up in the Caucasus. So what does that mean in the long term? Who breaks away and what happens? I think that the future of Siberia is going to be heavily dependent on what happens, who takes power, and what that does to oil and gas that are there. I mean, obviously, if Siberia was its own country with the amount of oil and gas that it has, yes, it'd be as rich as Dubai. But the fact is that the money is all taken to Moscow. But do the people there have actual agency to decide that? Could they actually break away? Or is the size of the military that is there, Russian military as well as the private military companies, such that would prevent that from happening? At the same time, I think that when we look at the other regions of Russia, I know that there's some who talk a lot about breaking down to 11 different countries and things, which, by the way, the Soviets, since the 1980s, 70s, 80s, I want to say, they published a lot about the United States breaking down eventually to 4 to 6 countries, depending on who it was. And that still hasn't come to fruition. But at the end, what is likely to happen in the case of Russia and how it breaks down to multiple countries? I think the most probable outcome would be that it could definitely go the direction of fiefdomism, where essentially you have somebody who sees a control. They have enough of the military or sizable enough that they can try to keep away the other part of the country and to keep those assets. But realistically, it'll be very challenging for them to do. I think most likely it would be a scenario that if you were to seize Moscow tomorrow, let's imagine Prigozhin had been successful. He was able to take part of the nuclear supply down in Rostov. Then he moved to Moscow and was able to seize power. If you had a split within Russia, I can't imagine somebody saying you can keep the oil and gas. That's okay. I'm pretty sure they tried to turn that into what they did to Chechnya during the first Chechen wars in the 1990s. I'm pretty sure they would just bomb those people and the people living in Siberia into oblivion so they can make sure that they could take the rest of the assets. Because ultimately, without oil and gas, Moscow doesn't function. I mean, there's really no Russia. So without that, there would be significant problems. In all cases, I think that Russia internally is already in a position that from all data that comes out of Russia would indicate that the central part of the country is dying. Look at the death of villages in Russia. Actually, it's fascinating. And by the way, I found out quite literally yesterday, there's entire YouTube channels that just cover central Russia and it dying out. It's a ghost town. It's amazing to see how much the population has dropped off there, economically, how far declined it's become, and how quickly it's worsening there. But as it does so and starts to thin out the population, you should ask, are the people there interested in some sort of autonomous movement? So far, it doesn't look like there would be a strong push for that. Even in a place like Chechnya, which is the one I always think is the most prime for having a movement that would be supportive of that. And obviously, there is a Chechen opposition, Ichirya and everything else, I know. But still, what is likely to happen there? Well, let's remember, about 93% of their Chechen budget comes from Moscow. It's not actually derived from the local dividends. So it's not because they raised a lot of money that they have a nice city in Grozny. Grozny, which is built on the ashes of the old Grozny destroyed by the Russian military, is being wholly subsidized by Moscow. So if you imagine what it's going to be like without Moscow paying for everything, then you have dire poverty. And who wants that? So I think that there's a lot of different tricks here that Moscow has in its pocket that can still use, different ace cards, to try to maintain control over the population and of the territory.
All right. Well, we can. I think that there will be actually additional incentives for territories to leave Russia because then they'll be out of sanctions. And I think that could be, or at least they can reasonably plausibly argue that they're not part of Russia. The sanctions were against Russia, and they're now something entirely different. So there could be, financial incentives. It's almost like an elderly people filing for divorce. It's just you might be able to tap into some more of the social benefits this way. Not calling anybody out, but I think that. If Russia breaks into a number of different countries or states, then there's a good possibility that some of them will become democratic. Some of them could go, and some of them will be more clan-like, and I have no idea how Chechnya is going to go, but I think that the more countries there are, the more there's at least theoretically possibilities of some of them choosing to go route off the West. Now we're also, I think, going to be interesting to see how resources are all pulled in different directions, if those territories truly are able to actually control their own fate and their own resources. I think that is going to reshape territory and relationship with the center dramatically. So I think that we just don't have quite the understanding, except that when we look at Russian weapons, it seems like except for attacking peaceful apartment buildings, that are not trying to harm anybody, and just basically attack civilian population, Russia is not showing much success on the battlefield. The number that I heard is that 94% of people who watching Johnson trying to figure out what's going on, but I think I got it. But statistic that I heard, Jason, tell me if you heard something otherwise, is that at this point 94% of Russians killed on the battlefield are killed by Ukrainian drones. So it's big, and so the meat grinder is becoming more automated, and I think that shows that there are ways of dealing with Russia. And when Russia, in its incessant threats of nuclear war, I think they would, I think they over time they should warrant less and less respect.
Well, the fact is that it's true. Yes, I don't know the exact percentage now. I thought it was in the 80s, but it could be 94%. It changes month over month. Obviously, the number that died due to drones. It's actually sort of amazing when you look at the Russian military bloggers. Just today, I was reading about some of them who were talking about that. They're sort of shocked. They said, we bring in a truck full of troops, and the Ukrainians bring in a truck full of drones, and next thing you know, we don't have any more troops. And that's pretty much the way it works. Russia historically has been able to win in war because it's massive size. I mean, obviously, it's got 140 million people compared to its neighbors. Ukraine pre-war, pre-2015, had only about 39 million people in the country. So it was a much larger size. So historically, if there's a war of attrition, that's something that they think would bode in their favor. The key here, and that's what Ukraine is obviously doing today, is to make this not a war of attrition. You need a paradigm shift. The paradigm shift that Ukraine has selected is to make it impossible for Russia to continue waging war in that fashion. In the case of drone warfare, by eliminating their ability to enter into direct combat with the Ukrainian side, hence preserving the Ukrainian troops while destroying the Russian ones and destroying Russian technology, its military equipment. That's something that's quite amazing how Ukraine's done it so efficiently, actually. And it's something that's changing the historic paradigm on which Russia has operated for so long. But Ukraine today is taking it to another level by these attacks in places like Tuapse. We saw just last night. We saw the attacks also in Novorossiysk, in Ufa, and, go through the list. Tons of these different attacks. The St. Petersburg region, Leningrad region, has the oblast around St. Petersburg's called Leningrad region. It has had a drone attack once every 9 hours. A drone, at least, has hit it once every 9 hours on average in the course of the past 3 months. That's amazing. St. Petersburg's 2,000 kilometers. It's like 1,200 miles away. And Ukraine is regularly doing this. Now, why that's so important is that it changes the nature of the war. Russia doesn't have the capacity, given its massive size, 11 time zones, to protect all of that with air defense. It doesn't have the capacity, given its massive size, to be able to secure all of its weak points. Consider the fuel lines. We see those fuel lines that go from Siberia to places like Novorossiysk. They go up to the north in Ust-Uga, Primorsk, and there it's where they put it onto the ships for export. That's 40% of the Russian national budget. Now, if Ukraine can attack their capacity to do that, it means you take away Russia's ability to get cash. Without cash, you can't fight a war. All these things are interconnected. So Ukraine is going for the most strategically wise points of attack. They'll have a systemic break for the entire Russian Federation. That's much more effective than Russia, which is hoping to take, square kilometers on the battlefield. How does the war fundamentally change if Russia tomorrow has an extra 500 square meters of Ukraine? It doesn't. Ultimately, it changes nothing whatsoever. Consider this. Russia today has had over 1,300 casualties in the course of this war. About 1 in 5 was just around the area of Pokrovsk. Now, Pokrovsk is a town that nobody knew existed before this war started. Nobody. And yet, Pokrovsk You're taking casualties of over 200,000 people to take a town that nobody knew existed. It doesn't sound like you're going to take Kiev in 3 days. It sounds like you're never going to take Kiev. And you'll be lucky if you take the next village over, which has most likely already been leveled. So it gives you no strategic advantage. The regions of Donbass that are still not taken, which is why I always harp on this, is it's absurd that some people want to have Ukraine give up Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast. The fact is, the part of Donetsk that is not currently under occupation is extremely strong. Ukraine has not only a foothold there, but the ability to maintain its dominance there for years into the future. According to British intelligence, to take the rest of the oblast would be another 1 million Russian casualties at least. And if that's the case, it becomes a twofold question. Why would they possibly get that many soldiers? They already have a deficit. As of last month, it was 9,000 soldiers per month, the number killed versus the number of new ones they need. But the deficit gets worse as of recent times. As I said, the casualties have increased dramatically. Today, the Russian deficit is becoming truly breaking. The Minister of Defense of Russia said 3 days ago that there is now, quote, a critical situation on the front line due to the lack of both drones and soldiers. But take it one step further. Look what's going on right now with the soldiers. As it's thinning out on the front lines for the Russians, it makes it more probable than ever that Ukraine could have a breakthrough. We saw what happened in Kherson. Small break turned into a very big break, then turned into a break down the line. And at that point, the Ukrainians flooded through. That could definitely happen again. It is definitely not off the table. So overall, when we're looking at the situation, Russia today, the fact that Ukraine is shaping the battlefield, and not by what is actually happening in Donbass, but shaping it what is happening inside of Russia, by making Russia's ability, capacity to wage war change, that is something that will change the outcome of this war. And that's where Ukraine today is using a strategy that Russia doesn't have anything comparable to, nothing comparable to. It's all much more complex for the Russians, and it's getting worse by the day. But Jonathan's back.
Mm-hmm. I'm back, and I wanted to bring back to not just the Economic Forum, because this is the first time that I've heard dissent on this scale coming out from the sort of regime-aligned, let's say, academic community. But we're also seeing something also interesting, which is the squeal of pain and dissent coming from the Z Patriot, Z blogger community. So we've got some infamous Russian fascist one that was interviewed by Ksenia Sobchak. I mean, she seemed to have no problem sitting in the same room as that guy. But there seems to be an acceptance that their goals haven't changed. Their willingness to dominate and erase Ukraine hasn't changed, and to steal anything that's not bolted down. But what seems to have shifted is a common understanding that those goals are no longer achievable. How does that then square if this realization is dawning upon the Z Patriot class, the professional class, etc.? Is this getting through to Putin, or is he still in a bubble of his own making, or is he cornered? Is he cornered like a rat with no other option but to continue?
Wouldn't you suppose, I mean, I would suppose at least, especially given his remarks at the Moscow Economic Forum, that he doesn't understand how bad the situation is. You know, I've heard a lot about Putin over the years, people that used to work with him and so forth. When he started his presidency, this is my analysis of all the people I've spoken to, when he started his presidency, he was more open-minded. He wanted to understand better. They'd meet with economists, as an example, and he'd really sit and try to understand what was going on, to understand why these different things mattered, how it would affect the national economy. And he really made an effort. But over time, he got tired of that. He got tired of hearing from them these different analyses, things are going to be bad. You know, economists, I'm sure, over the past 26 years, many times, said something's really bad. But somehow, Russia survived, he survived, so he doesn't really give it a lot of attention. But it's reached such a point where people don't tell him what's going on, that when he was speaking just 2 days ago, he said it was the second time in a month that he's called a top group of economists together to get to the bottom of what's wrong with the economy. It was sort of humorous. He said, I understand there's things like seasonal changes in purchasing, and I see that there's changes, you know, the gas prices go up and down. That also affects things. And it's like, yeah, but we're not talking about, you know, why is a 5-cent increase?
February exactly. Had 28 days, you know that.
It's amazing, isn't it? So this is, we're not talking about why they don't sell shorts in the wintertime. It's a little bit more complex. Your entire economy is falling apart. It's a lot more fundamental than simply seasonal changes. And so he is so detached from what's going on that it seemed, just for him to make those remarks with the seriousness that he made them, it makes me think that he really, at the end of the day, does not get it. He fundamentally does not understand it. And I think that the head of the central bank, Nabalina, and her statements was so interesting for that reason, where she said, here are all these different guys from from industry as well as from different ministries who are making these remarks that things are bad or it's very complicated. But where were all of you in December when you gave your remarks to the president saying that 2025 was a wonderful year, all successes, no problems, and 2026 is going to be even better? How is it that today you're all you're not saying that maybe you've been lying to him the whole time? She didn't say that, but it's what she's implying. No, perhaps you've been lying to him, and that's why everybody thinks everything's supposed to be fine, and they can't understand why it's not doing well. Well, yeah, if you're trying to make all your analysis based on bad data, nothing good is going to come out of it. And that's what we're seeing. So overall, I think Putin just does not get it. And that's a great thing, because it's going to only make things worse within Russia.
The question that I would have, Jason, and well, I have two questions. First of all, is if Christoph's audio and works well. And then second question, what is the most important metric that you're paying attention to? So in any order we want to check, but maybe the question first, and then we'll make sure that Christoph's audio works. And I'd love to hear a question.
Nobody's talking here?
Yes, we are. We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes I don't hear the people. That was very interesting, Jason, what you said. I think from Germany, let's put my German perspective again here. For me, it is completely not to understand why the reality can be shifted, and the people they vote for somebody like Trump, or they believe Putin is strong, and in fact all the incredible success what Ukraine puts there, they should be more emphasized. I already said that before. Yesterday I talked to classmates. I sent a mail to my classmates. We have still contact, and I was wondering how they would react. And I just got a very, very small reply, and most of them they don't want to speak about politics anymore. And I guess that's the point, that the media, they are not credible anymore. The politics are not credible anymore. The people, they put like an ostrich, the head in the sand. And so the evil forces, they can still survive. And Ukraine is the only country which is with physical force fighting for democracy and truth. And we all know that. But I wonder how Ukraine will shape the battlefield, so that how would Ukraine change the whole Europe in a while? What do you think?
Overall, Ukraine provides a lot of examples of good things, positive things. But I think overall, it's of course Ukraine right now, what it's doing in the fight it has against Russia. It's amazing actually that the Europeans, I think the Europeans as a whole do appreciate more the historic ramifications of this more than the Americans. And I think that's due to proximity and history. The Americans historically, if you look at the First and Second World Wars, was doing a little bit of a different thing. But in the case of this, I think that the Americans, unfortunately, in many cases, and I don't mean all Americans, obviously, because this group has Americans on as well, but there's definitely a lack of appreciation that people like dictators, like in the case of Vladimir Putin, he's not going to be satisfied by just going into Ukraine. It's part of something larger. And in his eyes, obviously, this is going to be part of a future effort that goes into breaking down the Western systems, the international order that has existed in the post-World War II space. Now, what it means, though, for the future of Russia itself is probably, I think, the question that affects everybody, and the Europeans should appreciate as well. It's a very cheap investment to help Ukraine right now if we're able to defeat Russia. During the course of the Cold War, I'll cite the U.S. again, just because I know the numbers better. Our expenditures on the Cold War were well ahead of $1 trillion in order to fight Russia, the Soviet Union. And if you think about all the expenditures, that's a huge amount of money over a lot of years, millions of people involved, then wars in other countries like Vietnam, Korea. This is all as a result of the fact of the Soviet Union having this expansionist foreign policy. Today, Russia is no different as expansionist foreign policy, but it doesn't have the might to do what the Soviet Union did. We can stop that, though, and save ourselves a ton of money in the long term if we just break Russia now for really a few $1 billion, which in the grand scheme of things, for the average taxpayer, we're talking cents per year, less than $2 a year. we can do a lot to degrade not only the Russian military, but to make sure that Russia is not able to be a threat to us in the future, and thus provide for our long-term security, thus reduce our long-term commitments to things like building up the military and future expenditures. This is going to save us money in the long term. It's a wise investment. It's the greatest return on investment we've ever had for our military. We consider the fact that we are now eliminating the specific military for what we built a lot of these things. We built a lot of this equipment to fight the Soviet Union, and today it's finally being used to destroy Soviet tanks now in the battlefields of Ukraine. So by supporting Ukraine as a not a proxy, but specifically as a country that is doing the hard work, we're giving them the instruments to achieve that. Obviously, it's something that we should be doing, but unfortunately, it seems that a lot of people just don't get that. And Yuri, you said something, and I apologize, I forgot what Yuri said.
My question was
Yuri?
this. Yes. Now that we determined that Christoph's audio works partially very well, the question is, what is the most important metric for you, Jason? Because
I
you're
cannot
such
hear
a
you.
numbers guy. Exactly. So I was wondering, yes, what is the most important number, metric, piece of data that you feel you're judging the situation by, or you're looking to see? Is there a number?
I think the only thing that, I mean, within Russia, the number that I think is the most interesting and what I've been sort of focused on is specifically the economic data. So we can look at, listen, Russia lies about a lot of numbers. So we don't know how a lot of things are doing. That being said, we can look at a lot of secondary data and see how it's doing. For instance, we can look at construction data. We see construction is way down in Russia. We can see that the number of people, new homes being built in Moscow is down 34% just in the course of a month. We can look at the number of people that are not paying back their loans to private banks. In fact, it's about 27% of bad loans now at one of the major credit banks in Russia. A massive bank, by the way. It's in the top 5. So if you look at that and you say, that's a lot of toxic loans. How bad is that? Well, when the U.S. had its 2008 financial crisis, which was significant, we only had 5, 6, 7% toxic loans. Russia's 27%. So when that bank is finally no longer able to pay back, when it's no longer has liquidity, then you see big problems. Look at the fact that today Russia is limiting the amount of cash you can take out. When you go to an ATM, you can't just take out however much you want. Or even when you go to the bank, the teller can decline to give you your money. Now, they use the guise of doing this to protect people from fraud. So you're not under duress taking out money. But the truth is, they're just trying to protect liquidity. Hence why you see, if you read Russian news, every day there's new fines that they're pumping out, a fine for this, a fine for that. Why are all these fines? Why is the parliament obsessed with such a nanny state where they're putting out fines for everything? It's because they're desperate for liquidity. They're going anywhere they can. They get it. But month after month, the amount of money that people are taking out of the banks is increasing. And about 74% of that money never returns to the banks. Why is that? Well, people don't trust the banking system. Given the fact that in November of 2025, a major think tank in Russia, which is financed by the Kremlin, said that there is a high risk of having cascading defaults in the Russian banking sector in 2026. I think that was November. Where are we now? There's a lot of reasons to be concerned for the Russian economy. And incredibly enough, as Jonathan just highlighted, Vladimir Putin himself does not appear to be tuned into that. He seems to be in a complete different world that's detached from the reality of how bad the situation is. What's funny about Putin, though, is that over time, I think it's his own arrogance, his own hubris, that he seems to believe that he can just order things. You know, he's ordered people to make more investments into the economy. But who wants to possibly invest money when you see that the ship is sinking? Nobody's going to put their money into that. Moreover, they want to have the ability to directly control the money they put into it, not to just blindly give it to the Russian government to invest for them. That doesn't sound very good. But look one step further, and where I think you see a really interesting detail that's come up recently. So Vladimir Putin met last week or the week before with some of the top oligarchs in the country. Combined, they have a net wealth of, I want to say, it was $336 billion. So estimated, $336 billion. So Putin came to them. He said, listen, the country right now needs you. Now, all these people, it's important as a side note for those who don't understand, anyone who became an oligarch became an oligarch by taking over privatized state assets at the end of the Soviet Union, throughout the 1990s, and by taking them over, quite often under very dubious, questionable means, they then rose to become these ultra wealthy people. Putin allowed them to stay in power, and they've all made deals with the Kremlin. They're all on the same team. So what's interesting, he meets with them. They all understand that this is their godfather, the one who allows them to keep their assets. And he said, listen, we need money to keep going. The Russian state needs it. They came together and pledged about $1.3 billion. $1.3 billion pledged, not even given over, pledged. That's nothing. That's what, 0.36%. That's nothing. That's not going to be something that's able to keep the state running. But go one step further than that. We've seen that 1 in 8 of the Forbes list of the top 200 wealthiest people in Russia, the billionaires list, 1 in 8 of them has had their assets taken the past 2 years by the Russian government. Well, what's behind that? Well, look at the port down in Dagestan. Look what we see going on with the major owners of major assets. Frequently, they're arrested, taken in, or their assets are frozen, and they're told, listen, you're going to be charged with all these different crimes. You're going to get 25 years in prison, hard, work in Siberian work camp, or you can acknowledge that you should not have taken that asset. That port should not be your port, and you'll give it to the state. And sure enough, oftentimes, as we saw in the case of Magomedov, he signed off, and within hours, that was no longer his port. That port worth billions of dollars became somebody at the FSB's port. What we're seeing right now is a crisis for resources. The FSB is fighting the military. Well, we've seen that. There's been over 17 generals arrested in the Russian military just in the past couple of years. By comparison, there's more than the number of generals arrested in all the NATO countries combined. In fact, it's substantially more. It's many times more. So when you think about that, you say, well, what's going on? Is it just because there's corruption in the Russian military? Well, think about this. Look at the charges that they're brought up on. It's usually related to corruption from 2008, 2010, 2012. That's a long time ago. So why are they just bringing charges now? It's because the FSB for all these years has had files on them, files of their corruption and their potential ability to be used in the future as blackmail, as compromised material against them. And today the FSB is taking them out, not just to shake them down for money, which they are. Look in the case of, I think it was Ivanov, who's the general who's arrested. He's in charge of promotions. Why it's interesting? So when they searched his house, they said they found a lot of revealing documents. Now, if you're in charge of promotions in the Russian military, it means that you're taking bribes from every last person to decide your next posting. Are you going to be in Siberia in the far north, or are you going to be in Sochi? It's up to how much you pay. Undoubtedly, he kept a black book. That black book records all these transactions. They undoubtedly have that. Undoubtedly, he gave all the testimony they'd ever want to receive about all these things because he didn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison. So today they have compromising material about the elites in the Russian military. Hence why we see increasingly that Russian military technology is going to be taken out of the hands of those who are coming from the sector of the military and put in the hands of those connected with the security bloc. That is those who are connected with people like Sechin. Sechin is, in fact, a very key player in this, but neither here nor there. As we see things moving into that sector, we're going to see, and by the way, Rostech, which makes about 80-something% of Russian military technology, Rostech has a completion rate of its projects of 98.5%. Now, how is it possible that they are completing all their projects while we see so many military contractors in Russia going broke in the middle of a war while they need this equipment? It's because the FSB and others are deciding we're not going to pay them. Screw them. Let them go broke. It's okay. We prefer to have that money go into our pockets or to go into companies that we control. And so they're just simply allowing these major military companies to go default in Russia during the course of war when they need the material. We're seeing a fight over assets within Russia that's absolutely incredible. And I think that's ultimately what's going to drive the future of the country. What do you think, Jonathan?
Yeah, one of the stories they did last week was on the degradation of the military transport fleet, the Antonov fleet that originally designed in Kiev. Now, there's a small problem with keeping their entire infrastructure, and they have a few Tupolovs, but most of it is sort of various iterations of Antonov. There's a couple of problems here. Well, one is they can't manufacture the spare parts because those originally came from Ukraine. They can't create those production lines, one, because it's technically complicated and probably outside of their ability. It's incredibly expensive, but they don't have any of the design plans. They don't have any of the molds. They don't have any of the production lines. And these planes are starting to fall out of the sky. But it talks to, we've got Mr. Greg Terry here. Hello
Hi,
there.
Jason. Hi, Jonathan. Hi, Yuri.
Hi
Keep talking,
Hello,
Jonathan.
Greg.
I will finish that thought, and then we'll do a proper introduction. But like Jason said, rather than putting their hand up straight away and saying, we can't do any of this, they're happy to take all the money. They're happy to spend the money on goodness knows what. It probably goes into people's pockets. And then they fake the documents to say that these transport planes, it's all fine, it's all good, they've all been serviced. And then they start dropping out of the sky, which happened recently. I did that episode. Someone helpfully in the comments pointed out that I'd missed out a key detail, which is it's not just the spare parts, it's also the airframes are now very old. So there's this intrinsic kind of ancientness in a lot of the infrastructure, which you can patch it up only so far. And in this case, they can't even patch it up. But ultimately, things are just going to start failing all over the place. That won't stop people from claiming that they are still, taking money hand over fist to fulfill these maintenance contracts. But the maintenance isn't being done.
But it is funny. You mentioned the aircraft. I'm sorry, Greg. I'll get right to, jump to you. I just want to comment what he said. You saw last week that they came out with their plan to restore the Antonovs. A lot of them they have that are 70 years old, 80 years old. They're looking to restore those as well, and a lot of more modern ones as well from the 70s and the 80s. By the way, they had to shelve that after just one day of talking about how there's the next big plan. They realized that's going to be really expensive. We probably can't do that. But that's a problem when you have this very antiquated equipment. Look at the artillery that came from North Korea. About 25% of it has to be refurbished before they send it to the front. But even then, Russia's had an increased problem of the number of their own soldiers who are getting blown up by their own artillery because it explodes. It's also not considered always to be stable. So it can just blow up as it's being moved. There is a lot of bad things that are happening when you're using stuff that is so old and antiquated. For Russia today, the situation is not good. There's nothing to look forward to. And the fact that the military bloggers in Russia today are talking about these problems so much and so clearly, it makes it all more clear that this is not just the pro-Ukraine viewpoint. This is the reality of the situation in Russia today is far worse than what we appreciate.
That's always a good note. It's cheerful thought. So thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. So the economy is what
Yuri,
you're paying.
Greg. We should do a quick introduction there with Greg, if you know Greg or don't know Greg.
Yeah, I know Yuri and Jason. I've been on with Yuri, but Jason a couple of times, just like in an event like this. So I follow Jason every day as well. All of you guys.
Great to see you, Greg.
Nice to see you. I'll just say this, and then we can go to Yuri, because I've been listening to you guys while I was working on some other stuff. And appreciate the fundraiser, everything happening. There's a lot of good things happening in support of Ukraine. So to everyone out there, Jonathan, thank you for hosting it. I'm glad that I can be here for a part of it. Gertis and I jumped in to help with the Easter Pysanky truck campaign, and so happy. The one I was trying to get to my buddy in Sumi, it's already delivered. I mean, these guys are awesome. So thank you guys for supporting all of these fundraisers. We appreciate it. I will just say this, listening to you guys before I even came on, it was the hope that the war of attrition would wear Ukraine out and would break their resolve. But the war of attrition now has actually reversed and is having a different effect, where the attrition is actually wearing down Russia. And that's what we're seeing. And today, I just dropped out a video this morning where we had Andrei Sabiga speaking today and stating that we're expecting more of these large-scale attacks, about 7 times a month. Then there was a second statement coming out of European leaders. It looks like this war could move on for a year, 2, maybe to 2030. And then I summarized that to say this: Zelensky popped up in Lviv, and just a few moments ago, I just translated him. He said, thankful for all of our partners. We finished a great tour, meeting friends, partners, raising support. But the bottom line is we've got to work with our friends to create our own air defense industrial military complex that we can rely on. We're not reliant upon supplies from other places, because the world is unstable, and we need to know that we can depend completely on the supply, and that will ensure security for Ukraine for decades. But he made one other little statement. He says the most important thing here is to show Russia that Ukraine is not weak, that the attrition is not affecting us in the capacity or the same way that it's affecting you. So I think this is a lot of what you guys have been talking about, just a little bit different look on. So as the war goes on, I think it's obvious to see. A blind man can see it. Ukraine's getting stronger and Russia's getting weaker, and we are witnessing it. So that's my 2 cents on y'all's last 20 minutes of conversation.
I'd like to ask you both, Greg and Jason, as well, to answer it maybe this way, because we've been bouncing this idea with Jonathan all day today, is that whether this is a moment of inflection or whether this is the end of the beginning, because while Ukraine is under attack every day, or at least 7 times a month, at the same time, Ukraine seems to have taken charge of the front lines to the point that 94% of Russian invaders currently are being destroyed by drones, which means that Ukraine has withstood the big push. And so now Trump can pretend that, Ukraine just needs to capitulate now or now or now, but that moment seems as far away from us as ever. And it seems that this is, the end of the beginning. How would you agree? Or actually, I'm in Wisconsin in the United States. What do I know? Gentlemen, what are your thoughts?
Jason,
Greg?
you or me? Okay. First of all, the front lines changed completely. You now have a 50 to 100 kilometer kill zone. You can't call it a 0 line anymore. It is now a gray line. I did a video update last night because it was confirmed that Putin wants to send 20,000 more troops into the Donetsk back rear to assist in fulfilling taking the Donetsk region, the fortress belt of Konstantinivka, Druchkiv, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and 20,000 soldiers. So I went from the angle of this. Okay, you know what? Bring them on. Welcome to Ukraine. Bring them on in here, because the First Corps of the Azov put out a really good video showing how they were striking targets in the rear. And, there you go. Striking targets in the rear, and it's stopping that flow. So for me, I think this is not the beginning. If you want to call it the beginning of the end, Yuri, that's fine. But I think it's the acceptance of reality. And the reality is, this is not the same war as it was in 2022. And it's completely different. Ukraine has locked down that front line. Of course, there will be gray line movements, but it's impossible to function without drones now and technology. I remember early in the war when we were making our first aid runs in 2022, we literally would drive 1 kilometer from the 0 and walk to the 0. Literally, Sumy region. Walk. You wouldn't get out of the vehicle 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers from any of those positions now. So for me, this is transition to the point. I think this is the fairest way I can say it, that there is absolutely no chance of Ukraine capitulating or, surrendering to any foreign powers, whether it's Washington, D.C., Europe, anybody, because every day their resolve gets stronger, and that window of opportunity closed. Period. They're going for victory, complete victory now. It's my personal opinion. Talking to my friends, soldier buddies, people that have given their lives. That's where I'm at.
What this suggests, though, and this is one for you and Jason, is that what we're going to see is increasing pressure coming from the Trump administration, from Hegseth, Eldridge Colby, and others, to try to force Ukraine to capitulate. We might even see pressure to have an unconditional ceasefire at this point. If Putin were to realize the state he's in, then we may start seeing pressure for not just capitulation, which is going to be ignored, of course, not just hand over the Donbass, which is where they are at the moment, but actually pressure for, let's just stop the guns. Let's just stop the guns. What do you think, Ukraine? I mean, that then would put Ukraine, I think, in a very difficult spot vis-a-vis not just the US, which is trying to be coercive, but European allies who are also pretty damn timid, actually, as well, and may well say, okay, well, this is what we wanted. Right, let's just end it here, which is maybe not the best outcome for Ukraine. Victory is the outcome that's required there, and a fundamental defeat of Russia. But over to you guys.
I think that ultimately we have to consider what's the objective of each, right? So in the case of negotiations, it would appear that the White House's primary objective is to end the war at any cost, just make sure it ends. Okay. In the case of Russia, their objectives have changed over time. That's very clear. And look at what Putin has said recently. It seems that their objectives have changed. That being said, one of the chief objectives remains taking the rest of Donbass and Lugansk. Still, about 0.4% of Lugansk is not taken. In the case of Donetsk, there's a lot more that's not taken. And as I just said earlier, it would take more than 1 million lives to take the rest of it. So the Russians have no chance of being able to take that by themselves. Their only hope is to have some sort of a paradigm shift. But a paradigm shift on the battlefield is unlikely, improbable. It's just not going to happen. What they can hope for is that the United States puts undue duress and pressure on Ukraine to give up territory that Russia for itself could not otherwise take. That's why today should expect that Russia is going to try to seek to do other things that are going to change the calculus of the war. At present, it's obvious to everybody, including the Russians, that it's not working out well for them. That's why they have to do something different. But that something different, it could take a lot of different forms, and we're just not sure where it is. I saw in the past hour that Lukashenko put all the military officers that are reservists onto active duty. Zelensky immediately issued a statement that Ukraine's ready to defend its territory from Belarus. The fact they issued a statement actually so quickly after Lukashenko's statement sort of is surprising and might indicate that they have intelligence on something else. That's not just because. I mean, typically, Zelensky does not weigh into these sorts of things if it's just Lukashenko or Putin says something. He weighs in when there's a need to weigh in. So I thought it was sort of interesting. But also, we saw what was yesterday. I think it was British intelligence. I'm incorrect. It's not British intelligence. It was someone else. Come to me a second. Who was Swedish? It was Swedish intelligence. So there's of course the chance that the Russians would try to take something like an island from one of the Baltic states. What would be the objective? Well, you take this island. The fact is, it will take a while from anybody to respond, but it also changes once again the paradigm of this war. European countries then become much more concerned about domestic security. That means also less weapons flow to Ukraine because everybody has to worry about their own security. Air defense, Ukraine needs more of it. Zelensky said yesterday that there is an historic low point for the amount of Patriot missiles that Ukraine has. So if you're going to do something, well, how do you make sure the Ukrainians have no more air defense? You can't physically attack all those different Patriot missiles, but you can try to cut off the aid going there. Russia historically has tried to do that through persuasion by saying that that would bring the European countries into the war. That didn't work. So what can they do? Well, they can try to make the Europeans decide for their own selves to not send the weapons. But it's, again, reflective control. The real objective here is not about taking a Baltic island. The real objective here is how do you get the Europeans to change their behavior? Hence, we've seen the increasing attacks by Russia sending drones into European territory. We've seen them also do things like the arsons, the assassination, the terrorism across Europe as part of a larger thing. Not just projecting Russian strength, but rather trying to get the Europeans to secure themselves ahead of helping Ukraine. But the Europeans, I hope, have the forethought on this, and the Ukrainians certainly do, is how about this? How about we don't just react to what Russia wants, but we set the tone. And the way that you set the tone is by breaking Russia. And the way that you break Russia is through what we need now, which is more coercion in the economy, but further, to do what is necessary to break the Putin regime, allowing their economic system to go into full free fall. It's closer than a lot of people think. But given already what we're seeing on the front lines, their objective for this year was about 409,000 soldiers they were seeking to recruit. They were recruiting about 1,200 soldiers a day before. It was about 1,000 per day right before New Year's, Christmas. Today, it's about 800 per day. They're not going to get the 410,000 soldiers that they wanted. It looks like realistically, 290,000 is the best case scenario. But at that point, on the battlefield, they have a significant lack of soldiers. The police are burning through them so fast. They would have so few that today they would not be able to continue maintaining their lines. At that point, once again, Russian lines can break much easier than a lot of people appreciate. Another benefit of the drone warfare is that Ukraine isn't just attacking the Russians' positions and not just attacking the drones that are incoming from the Russian side. They're also doing a lot of spying. They're making sure that they can see what is going on the Russian side, where those weaknesses are, and how to make them worse. Notice that Ukraine over the past month has had increased numbers of attacks on air defense units in Lugansk as well as in Donetsk, but also they're attacking ones in Bryansk. They're also attacking ones in Crimea. It's to keep the Russians always concerned to where the next attack will come, and they're positioning themselves to be able to move in any direction. The Russians don't have the capacity to respond to that many different shifts at one time. This, again, puts Ukraine into an advantageous position. It's a position that allows Ukraine to then be the ones that's dictating what happens on the battlefield. And that's what you need to be, the one with the initiative, not the one responding to initiative. This war started because Russia took the initiative. It can stop, though, when Ukraine has not only the initiative, but the tools necessary from the West to break Russia and bring it to its knees. And the Putin regime is truly much, much weaker than people appreciate. Just look at what they're saying in the Moscow Economic Forum. Again, not Ukrainian propaganda, Russians and Russia that talk to the Kremlin saying the wheels are about to come off the bus. Things are looking very bad. And so we should do what we can to break them.
I concur with that statement completely. Completely.
Somebody talking?
I guess
No.
my
I
perspective.
know
Yeah, I was
Yuri's
going to
turn.
say,
And
It was
right,
this
Yuri's
everybody
perception of
jumps in.
the perception of weakness is interesting, isn't it? Because could it be that Putin perceives his system to be far stronger? I think from what Jason said, he is. Could he perceive his military to be far better stocked than it is and far more effective than it is? Probably. But this deluding sense of strength and weakness, as Christoph said earlier, it transitions also through to Brussels, Washington, and so on. I mean, listen to the premier of Belgium, although there may be some other reasons why he comes out with this stuff. But it does seem that in the corridors of power, one, there is this absolute horror and revulsion at the idea that Russia's going to collapse. We've got to prevent that at every cost. But there still is this idea that Russia is inevitable, cannot be defeated, etc., etc. And we know that's also one of the principal messages that's pumped through various propagandistic channels. But it seems to be very deeply ingrained in the corridors of Brussels, the corridors of Whitehall, and the corridors of, dare I say it, the Pentagon and in Washington as well.
But it seems like this kind of approach is now working against Russia, because this idea that Russia is going to win and let Russia continue the war, Russia is just getting itself destroyed. And so how much longer are they going to put up with just being automated to slaughter, when everybody else is willing, like Trump said, well, I guess they just need to, two kids in the park need to fight it out until they're ready to settle. Well, this is looking worse and worse for Russia, I feel.
It is sort of absurd when you hear that, isn't it? But I think it shows the total disconnect between what's going on. It's profound. Yeah. Okay. It's terrible to watch the U.S. president's response at times, because it just shows total ignorance as to what's occurring and why it's occurring and how it's occurring. But important here is the fact that there is far too much of us. And it goes back to the Soviet Union. By the way, it's not the first time this happened. In the Soviet Union, there's a lot of people who do not want to see it break apart. They're worried what would happen next. You remember, actually, the 1990s were a very illustrative period of time. We saw at Bush, he didn't want to see, Ukraine be really separate from Russia. We had Margaret Thatcher didn't want to see Eastern Western Germany get reunited because that could only work out badly. There's a lot of concerns, and it's sort of funny, like in the end, well, it turns out you're wrong. History does change. There are a lot of things that repeat. Russia's inherently imperialistic. That is true. That is what their history shows us. But that can change. Everything can change in history. And I do drives me nuts to always hear the same line that, Russia's not democratic. They've always been imperialist. It is true. You know what? The Japanese also were. And after World War II, that changed. And it was not because they wanted to change. They were made to change. Countries can change. They are made to change. So I think that if we look at the history of democracy in Japan, it's quite short, but it's been very successful. And that was because the conditions were set by an outside force that made that happen. In the case of Russia, I think that there are ways that make that happen. After Putin falls, however that happens, and I think it's more likely not going to be by his own choice that his downfall comes or his end is realized. But I think that when that does happen, there are ways to force different things into Russia. And the defeat, I think, by Ukraine, defeating Russia will be something that will be a cultural shock for them, unlike any others. And that is a total shift from the way that Russia thinks of itself and its imperialistic history. And I do agree strongly that Gary Kasparov has said many times, which is ultimately the only thing that will ever end Russian imperialism and the sickness, the belism, sickness of imperialism is going to be when there is a Ukrainian flag flying over Sevastopol. Until that point, there's Ukraine takes back Crimea. It shows Russia they can't just break in and steal something considered to be its own. And that day that will reset the Russian mindset where they realizes those days are over. Russia is no longer what it once was.
Really, such a humble view from Gary Kasparov to only have Ukrainian flag over Sevastopol. Why not over Kremlin? I mean, that would teach him a lesson. I mean, it used to be Kiev Rus anyway.
I mean, if the Lithuanians were able to take it, why can't also the Ukrainians?
There you go.
But if you think about something, guys, we've all been doing this for years now. In fact, there's a lot of experience on this panel right here, with Russia and Ukraine, of course. We were not having this conversation 24 months ago. It had a different nuance to it. 12 months ago, we were not having the same conversation. This conversation is evolving into now not only holding on and defending, but we're talking about a complete paradigm shift in our world. And I personally feel, Jason, you know, I'm coming from a background of a conservative Christian missionary working all over the world. I'm working 38 different nations and cultures. For me, this is a beautiful thing that can happen in the end. Out of ugliness can come goodness. And I see us more moving toward that, because right now there's a lot of paradigm shifts that are needed, not only in the Kremlin, but DC, around the world. And are they possible? Absolutely 100%. History has proven it. History may not repeat, but I think Mark Twain wrote, it often rhymes. So I firmly believe we're seeing that shift in sentiment. Now, let me just throw one example. I work with a lot of evangelical pastors and leaders all over the U.S. and a lot of these hard right Christian nationalists. Their perspective is starting to change slowly. I am not one of them, okay? But their perspective is changing. I can't tell you, well, I can tell you, the list of guys and ladies calling me saying, is it really true that it's Russia destroying the churches and not Ukraine? Okay. I said, I've been telling you this for 5 years, because even yesterday, the Baptist church in Zaporizhia that was destroyed from a glide bomb, the calls are coming. So there is a shift in sentiment. And if we just keep the hammer down and everybody keep pulling their weight, I firmly believe that we can see our world shift for the better. I'm not a fatalist. I'm not a doom and gloomer. I believe in a better future. I believe in a sovereign Ukraine. I believe Ukraine retakes its 1991 borders. I believe that Putin is gone and that people wake up and life changes. We've seen it in Japan. We've seen it in Germany. We've seen it throughout history. And why not again? So maybe a little too optimistic there, but this is what I fight for.
That's great. I totally agree with you.
Gentlemen.
Well, the two, on my screen, I'm looking at our back screen. The two on the left are green here. So check the left on the left.
You could play like pickleball, you know?
Yeah, this is the pickleball screen.
Right.
Listen, today, it was just a few minutes ago that Lukashenko put out a video that Belarus is 100 times the greater democracy than the United States and Europe. And he's been telling everybody that, and he wants to teach everybody that. I just translated it. It's going out on my afternoon video. But come on, guys. It's easy to see. It's easy to see. We've got it in a place where things can shift.
Lukashenko really needs to watch out, because we might stop providing him with the weight loss injections. So you better watch out what it says.
I think they now have went to that was the free departing gift for Viktor Orban, was a lifetime supply of Ozempic after the election, and anyway, I'm just messing.
Well, if the Russians are not going to be feeding him anymore,
no,
then it's a different situation. Jonathan, how are we doing on time? It feels like we're by some measure we're at our time to complete. By other measure, we're not at quite 4 hours. What are we doing? Do we have wisdom parting words and gifts and presents for our panelists, or what's going on?
Let's do that. I think it makes sense to go around the room, as it were, just to follow what Jason said. By liaison internally, chuma externally. That's Russian imperialism.
It's awesome.
For those who don't speak, it's the difference between illness internally and plague externally.
It's a good quote.
Yeah, I just feel like something that I've been trying to spread awareness of in Ukrainian media for the last few months, and I feel like it's taking root, is that all hope for security guarantees from United States are foolish, and will not bring any security guarantees as long as we have this president, and then who knows what will be after that. So that means that security guarantees now need to come from Europe, because Europe is now the one who also is stuck with the Russian threat and also has to deal with the fact that the United States is going crazy now. And so at the same time, Europe doesn't have an army. But guess who does? Ukraine. So this is like a really match made in heaven, because you have a combination. I mean, I always share my experience of when I was on the Janesville City Council, and I was involved in all sorts of community events organizing. And you see some festival downtown where there's business owners who will put in the money, but they don't have the time to walk away from their business. And then somebody else who is willing to volunteer, but they don't have the money. And so to put together, so working together, I think that Europe and Ukraine have a very promising partnership, which it seems like it's already developing. So I feel like that's just a path forward, while United States battles our internal disease that we need to, get through.
So absolutely agree with you. By the way, I just looked at the news again. I apologize because I wish to correct what I said. It's not that Lukashenko said something. Ukrainian military intelligence shows that the Belarusians are building roads, temporary military roads, to the border of Ukraine that go around Ukrainian artillery positions, which they believe could be used in an imminent attack on Ukraine. So let me correct that. That's what it is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, gentlemen, I really want to thank everyone who is with us here now, but also everyone who was here with us throughout this experience. I feel like this was almost something that I started once here in Wisconsin called community coffee. I feel like that's kind of almost what we did here is, we got together, discussed the situation, and I feel like I learned exactly. Thank you, Greg. Right. And I just really like the vibe of this conversation. I hope we are able to continue this going forward. I'm sure we will, because why not? And thank you, gentlemen. I feel like the only thing that is missing, though, is we need some ladies here. But we'll work on that, because I'm sure there are important voices that we can have join this conversation, and it'll be even better. Otherwise, this was amazing as always. Thank you, Jonathan.
Jonathan, Martin
Fantastic.
Lundstrom put in
Great
your
to see
chat.
you all.
Hey, Jonathan, 1 second. Martin Lundstrom put in your chat, I think, in response to what Jason said about the roads being built. He says, well, the road goes both ways. And I think good comment, Martin Lundstrom. Great. The road does go both ways.
That's great.
Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you, guys.
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
And